Chapter 451. Li Tianlan couldn't answer Wang Tianzong's question. The indistinct but extremely heavy and majestic sword intent confined him where he was. Li Tianlan couldn't move or speak. He stood in a stiff posture holding the gun. The only thing that could move was his eyes. A pair of eyes as calm as water. Wang Tianzong saw thinking in this pair of eyes. In this state, Li Tianlan was like a statue. The surrounding wind blew slowly. The surrounding air suddenly became extremely thick. The curtain of night seemed to be glowing. It was faintly discernible and intermittently visible. It was a very obscure glimmer, but it carried a kind of radiance that was enough to illuminate the cold moon. Only the sun could illuminate the cold moon. Wang Tianzong was the sun. The only sun in this era shone brightly. Li Tianlan quietly looked at the thick and obscure space around him. He suddenly felt a little ridiculous. Jiang Qiansong claimed to be the best in defense in the dark world. This fact might be true before Wang Tianzong broke through. But in the headquarters of Samsara Palace, Wang Tianzong almost lifted the whole deep sea alone. The sword intent of tens of thousands of meters crossed the sky and destroyed everything. In this state, Wang Tianzong had vaguely broken through the peak of the invincible realm and was only half a step away from the real chosen one. In this state, Wang Tianzong was really close to perfection. His path was not only light, but darkness as well. Day and night alternated. Defense and offense were both multiplied explosively. This was the current Wang Tianzong. It could be done without batting an eyelid, or it could be earth-shattering. Li Tianlan could not even tell whether the space that suppressed and confined him was sword intent or domain. In terms of the martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai, there was not much difference between sword intent and domain when they reached the extreme, because the core essence of their martial arts was outbreak. This space, which was like a sword intent or a domain, firmly suppressed him. Li Tianlan's eyes moved and he looked at Wang Tianzong coldly. He could roughly understand Wang Tianzong's state at this time, but he could not break Wang Tianzong's current sword intent. The realm gap between them was too big. As Wang Tianzong said, Li Tianlan could not do anything if he did not allow him to do it. Under such a gap, Li Tianlan was not even qualified to fight desperately. The sword intent surrounded him. Li Tianlan's figure was stiff and he could not even move. How could he fight desperately? Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Tianlan and suddenly said, "Apologize." King Tong, who had struggled back from the edge of death, was uneasy. She glanced at Li Tianlan and thought to herself, "This lunatic can't move or speak. How can he apologize?" She wanted to remind Wang Tianzong, but as soon as she raised her head, she found that Wang Tianzong's eyes fell on her. King Tong suddenly understood, and her hand, which was held by Wang Tianzong, suddenly tightened. Wang Tianzong didn't mean that Li Tianlan should apologize to her. Instead, he wanted her to apologize to Li Tianlan. King Tong suddenly felt extremely angry. This kind of anger combined with the fear just now made her look very complicated. At that moment, King Tong was sure that if it weren't for Wang Tianzong, she would have been killed by Li Tianlan's spear. The feeling of brushing past death made her sweat all over, and her heart was still pounding. In a state of shock, Wang Tianzong asked her to apologize to Li Tianlan. She looked at Wang Tianzong in a daze. She looked at the man she had loved for many, many years. Wang Tianzong's expression was calm, and peaceful. King Tong suddenly smiled self-deprecatingly. Tonight, it could be said that she was humiliating herself. She came here as a dominator, let Jiang Qiansong go, and angered Li Tianlan. Wang Tianzong saved her. But there had to be an explanation for this matter. Li Tianlan was no longer the young man a few years ago or even a few days ago. Now Li Tianlan was His Highness and the youngest marshal in the special warfare system of Zhongzhou State. Wang Tianzong could save her life by virtue of the cooperation between Beihai, Zhongzhou State, and Rothschild. But she had to show her attitude. Apologize. Wang Tianzong repeated it again. King Tong bit her lip, and her face was a little pale. She should apologize for not suppressing Li Tianlan for what happened today. This was a normal thing. She knew that Wang Tianzong had considered a lot, but she didn't know what he had considered. After all, he didn't care. If he didn't care, how could he like her? King Tong took a slow step forward. She really didn't know what Wang Tianzong was thinking when he asked her to apologize. Was it the overall situation? Cooperation? Interests? Politics? Future prospects? From his standpoint, this was indeed a question he should consider. But King Tong still felt a little wronged. Because she knew very well that she was the one standing here today, so she needed to apologize to Li Tianlan. But if it was Summer Solstice standing here today, even if it was wrong, even if it was inappropriate, even if it was not for the overall situation, Wang Tianzong would not let Summer Solstice bow. King Tong walked up to Li Tianlan and bowed deeply. The moment she bent down, the whole sky seemed to dim completely. Her voice was a little hoarse and hollow. "Please forgive me, Your Highness." The surrounding space became dimmer and dimmer. King Tong stared straight at the ground and at Li Tianlan's military boots. The sticky space slowly drifted away. Li Tianlan's calm and indifferent voice sounded. He looked at Wang Tianzong and said calmly, "This sword stroke is very powerful." Wang Tianzong raised his eyebrows. Then, Li Tianlan's voice sounded again. "But it's not enough. For this era, this sword stroke is enough." Wang Tianzong said, "Nothing can break it, but it's indestructible." "How is it not enough?" "Nothing could break it. It was an absolute defense. It was indestructible. It was an ultimate attack." Li Tianlan laughed. "Nothing can break it?" He said calmly, "I want to have a try." Wang Tianzong subconsciously narrowed his eyes. It seemed to be the reappearance of chaos before its fall. Li Tianlan looked at King Tong and said calmly, "Forgive me? You let Jiang Qiansong go, and half of the painstaking efforts of the Snowdance Corps and the Qin clan have been destroyed. How can you forgive me?" In the increasingly subtle and dark space, Li Tianlan's voice seemed to be far away. I won't forgive you." Crack! The sound of space shattering rang out without warning. Li Tianlan, who could not move at all, directly raised his right hand. The whole world suddenly became extremely quiet. The world was quiet. In the absolute silence and nothingness, the mountains, rivers, and the world seemed to shrink in an instant, and everything in the world fell silent in an instant. Nothingness. Desolation. But it was extremely real. In the real world, an illusory sword light appeared. The sword light was ethereal and condensed. It was neither fast nor slow, but it could not be stopped. Because in the real world, speed had no meaning at all. Sword light. Sword energy. Sword intent. It kept falling down. Li Tianlan stretched out his hand and pointed at King Tong. In an instant, reality and illusion began to alternate. The world was a void. The sword energy that rose into the sky became the only eternal thing in an instant. The fiercest sword. The most real sword. The space was broken. The sword intent was broken. Wang Tianzong's sword intent was completely torn apart with the broken space, forming ripples one after another. Wang Tianzong frowned slightly. Countless viscous spaces suddenly enveloped King Tong. Li Tianlan's arm was like a sword, and he slowly pointed over. The space, which was thick enough to completely imprison an invincible realm expert, was shattered in an instant. Nothing could break it? This sentence was like a joke under Li Tianlan's sword. Wang Tianzong's eyes had become completely serious. He raised his hand and gently pulled it back. King Tong's figure retreated wildly under the huge force. Tens of meters, hundreds of meters, hundreds of meters. Li Tianlan's fingers stretched out. The sword intent that shattered everything spread wildly, and in an instant, it had expanded to a kilometer away. Wherever the sword light passed, the hard ground and the void were completely torn apart. Li Tianlan pointed casually, and it seemed that he had directly pointed out a terrifying void that was thousands of meters long. Wang Tianzong frowned, took a step forward, and directly stood in front of Li Tianlan. Day and night suddenly alternated for a moment. The peace on Wang Tianzong's body faded away, and the majestic and domineering dark sword light bloomed in his hand in an instant. The two sword lights suddenly met at the shortest distance. It was like the collision of two peerless famous swords. In the sound of gold and iron colliding, the two sword lights collapsed as soon as they touched. Puff! A mouthful of blood sprayed directly from Li Tianlan's mouth. The vibration of the joints was extremely clear. Li Tianlan could even clearly feel that there were cracks on the bones of his arms, which were almost completely broken. Dark red blood bloomed from Wang Tianzong's hands. His arms trembled uncontrollably, and he finally hid them behind him. Everyone looked at Li Tianlan with a shocked face. Qin Shilai was especially incredible. At the closest distance, Qin Shilai could completely confirm the power of Li Tianlan's sword just now. The absolute peak of the invincible realm. And it was the top peak of the invincible realm sword intent. How could Li Tianlan become so strong? Wang Tianzong glanced at Li Tianlan, then looked past him and into the distance. He glanced over the ruins of the castle and cast his gaze into the dark mountain area in the distance. Wang Tianzong was silent for a long time before he slowly said, "How dare you borrow this sword strike?" Li Tianlan tried hard to swallow the blood in his mouth. He said calmly, "My sword is here. There's nothing to hide." Wang Tianzong smiled and commented rudely, "Stupid." Li Tianlan sneered and said nothing. Of course, he had not reached the peak of the invincible realm. The sword strike just now, as Wang Tianzong said, was borrowed. His sword intent was flawless. But the sword energy was not that strong. So he used his sword intent to borrow an extremely powerful sword energy in the distance. In an instant, the sword energy and sword intent combined, and the power directly soared to the peak of the invincible realm. And at the price of this, Li Tianlan exposed a part of his martial arts to the other party. It was hard to say whether such a price was big or small. But there was another problem. If he wanted to make this sword strike almost compete with Wang Tianzong at the moment of borrowing the sword, such sword energy must be similar to Li Tianlan's own martial arts in some aspects. It could even be of the same origin. In the whole dark world, there were only two people who were qualified to lend sword energy to Li Tianlan except Wang Tianzong. Lin Fengting was not here. Then there was only one person who appeared here. Purgatory of Heaven Capital. Deity. It could only be deity. Wang Tianzong looked at the darkness in the distant mountains and was silent for a long time. Chapter 452. Li Tianlan was also silent for a long time. Everything in Wulan State was coming to an end as planned, but the closer it was to the end, the more lively the scene became. After tonight, the Jiang family of South America, which had no possibility of turning the tables, was destined to withdraw from the game in Eastern Europe. The Snowdance Corps forced the Jiang family of South America to retreat, but the scene was more complicated. On the day of death, Jiang Chenyan, Black Ghost, and Chaos died. Li Tianlan was seriously injured. Jiang Qiansong was seriously injured. Qin Shilai was seriously injured. After the night, Li Tianlan had to face the covetous eyes of the Wang family of Beihai and Rothschild. It was the Vatican with a subtle attitude. It was the pressure that was finally transmitted to Eastern Europe after the internal game of Zhongzhou State. The 5 Eastern European countries had no choice but to surrender. It was the hostility of the whole of Europe. All of the various superpowers were paying close attention to this matter. They were all the variables that might be caused after the Purgatory of Heaven Capital entered Wulan State. Li Tianlan's breath was a little heavy. These were all questions he had to consider. The man, the general, and the marshal all had their own standpoints. But as a paragon, he had to adjust his stance to the bigger picture. Every paragon had to deal with a problem like Li Tianlan. The one who was able to deal with all these complications as if they were light was the true ruler, or rather, the ambitious and ruthless person. Li Tianlan turned his head and looked back. There was only darkness in the distance. But the darkness was incomparably sharp and dense. Sword chi that was as majestic as the sky filled the darkness in the distance, like lightning hidden in the 9 heavens. It was hidden, but the entire horizon was filled with a sharpness that could tear everything apart. All Li Tianlan could see was the dark sword energy. The sword energy of the 24 moves of sword. The sword energy of the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan was the first to feel the sword energy. At first, this sword energy quietly converged in the sword intent around Li Tianlan, as small as a drop of water. It was not that Wang Tianzong could not find it. It was just that he didn't notice. That was why Li Tianlan borrowed deity's sword energy, combined it with his own sword intent, and went straight to the peak of the invincible realm. Li Tianlan could feel the initiative of this sword intent. But he also could not forget deity's undisguised killing intent towards him when he was in Tiandu. So why did God take the initiative to lend the sword? What was his motive? He slowly turned around. Wang Tianzong also withdrew his gaze. God still did not appear. In the majestic dark sword intent that almost filled the sky, Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong's eyes met for a moment. Li Tianlan looked at Wang Tianzong thoughtfully. Wang Tianzong's eyes rested on Li Tianlan's hand, and he was also thoughtful. Li Tianlan held falling stars in his hand. There was also a primitive heaven underworld spring in the falling stars. Although the two guns were forced back by Wang Tianzong, they were still damaged to a certain extent. However, such damage was not a serious problem in the eyes of any superpower. Wang Tianzong's eyes became a little softer quietly. He smiled. There was no negative emotion in this smile. This feeling, are you and I enemies or friends? Wang Tianzong suddenly asked. Boundless emptiness and exhaustion eroded Li Tianlan's body and will. His body was still straight, and he said expressionlessly, the overall situation is the most important. Wang Tianzong nodded with a smile. He looked at Li Tianlan with appreciation in his eyes, but behind the appreciation, there was a touch of killing intent. Two completely different ringtones rang at the same time. Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong took out their mobile phones at the same time. Li Tianlan looked slightly surprised. He didn't know who was calling Wang Tianzong at this time, but the person who called his mobile phone at this time was a real big shot. Li Tianlan picked up the phone and said hello in a hoarse voice. You did a good job in Wulan State, and you made a name for yourself. It seems that Tianzong's recommendation of you at that time also had a positive effect. They were right about one thing. In the chaos, Xianxia State, as the strongest country, should have the spirit to match the strongest national strength. Comrade Ton, when you come back, I will celebrate for you. A gentle and smiling voice sounded from the other side of the phone. Li Tianlan's heart, which had always been tight, slowly relaxed. He was waiting for this call. Because Xianxia State had been silent on the international stage. Now this voice sounded in his ears. It would not be long before the voice of Xianxia State would be heard all over the world. This proved that the entire Xianxia State had a completely unified attitude. You flatter me, President. Li Tianlan's voice was soft and peaceful. On the other side of the phone, President Li Huaqing smiled and said intentionally or unintentionally, do you have some misunderstanding with Tianzong? There is no misunderstanding. Li Tianlan said indifferently, it's just that the Snowdance Corps has dyed Eastern Europe with blood, and the heroic souls of Xianxia State need a home. This is the elegy and glory of Xianxia State and the Snowdance Corps. Neither the Sword Emperor nor the so-called Queen can violate the will of the Snowdance Corps. His voice was indifferent and determined. This kind of words might be more effective in front of the entire Snowdance Corps. But after all, he was still changing, and what he was growing was not only martial arts. So there were some words that he still couldn't say in front of the Snowdance Corps. But in the face of Li Huaqing, Li Tianlan did not hesitate to show his attitude, leaving no room for retreat. Li Huaqing was silent for a while. Comrade Fang Qing is communicating with Tianzong. Tianlan, we know the grievances between Beihai and the Li family. But now you and Tianzong are the flags of Xianxia State in Eastern Europe. Everything is important, and you can't let others see you as a joke. Li Huaqing's tone was calm. Li Tianlan twitched the corner of his mouth and said, you ask him. He knows what's going on. This, he, naturally referred to Wang Tianzong. Li Huaqing said yes, a little confused. Li Tianlan did not explain, but said blandly, before dawn, the flag of the Snowdance Corps will fly in the center of the capital of Wulan State, and I will raise the flag myself. He hung up the phone casually. The meaning of this sentence was already very obvious. He would hang the flag of the Snowdance Corps in the center of the capital of Wulan State. Even in the face of the Sword Emperor and the Queen, he would not give in. Wang Tianzong also hung up the phone at the same time. He glanced at Li Tianlan, slowly turned around, and walked in the direction of Qingtong. I will stay in Wulan State recently, he said. Staying in Wulan State meant that he would not retreat. His voice was very soft. But with the sudden breeze, it spread throughout the night in an instant. Li Tianlan did not express any opinion on this, but said blandly, "You should thank me." Wang Tianzong did not look back, but said calmly, "It should be the people around you who should thank you." He passed by Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, and glanced at her. "If the Vatican is dissatisfied, let the Pope come to me in person. Beihai, Eastern Europe, or the Holy Land, I will wait for him." There was no wind in the night in the distance. But Wang Tianzong's voice came clearly from the ruins in the distance. Deity stood on the top of a steep mountain in the mountains. He was covered in black clothes and held a huge scythe that was 3 meters long in his hand. He watched the scene quietly. The overwhelming sword intent covered the mountains. He stood there in an incomparably real way, and the surrounding mountains became illusory. He watched the fight between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong at that moment. He saw the two of them pick up the phone. He saw Wang Tianzong turn around. He also heard Wang Tianzong's voice. Deity did not say a word, but the light in his eyes was full of indifference. Daybreak stood beside Deity and suddenly said, "He will stay in Wulan State recently. That's what I said to you." Deity did not respond. He did not even look at Wang Tianzong. He just looked at Li Tianlan quietly. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said blandly, "Good for nothing." Daybreak smiled and said, "I think he is very calm and rational." "Rationality is useless." Deity shook his head. "Strictly speaking, this is not even a breath of resentment." He did not suffer a loss tonight. On the contrary, if he really did what you hoped, the next result would be unbearable for him and Xianxia State. Daybreak commented, "This is their overall situation." Deity did not speak. Daybreak also fell silent. Sometimes, sudden help wasn't kindness. At least Deity did not lend the sword just now out of kindness. Sometimes being stubborn and not giving in was not full of hostility. Wang Tianzong staying in Wulan State was not hostile. At that moment, Deity's sword energy and Li Tianlan's sword intent merged. In the instantaneous confrontation, only Deity could clearly feel that Li Tianlan deliberately interfered with Deity's sword energy with sword intent. Li Tianlan borrowed this sword strike. But he did not exert the full power of this sword strike. At that time, Wang Tianzong did not notice Deity's sword intent at all. So if Li Tianlan did not hold back, it was equivalent to a full sneak attack on Wang Tianzong by an expert at the peak of the invincible realm at a very close distance. King Tong would die without a whole body. Wang Tianzong would be seriously injured in an instant. And it would be a real serious injury. He might even die directly. The Marshal of Xianxia State made a sneak attack and killed the Sword Emperor of Xianxia State. If he joined forces with foreign forces, what was that? At that time, not to mention competing for the interests of Eastern Europe, there would be a great disturbance within Xianxia State. Xianxia State would withdraw from Eastern Europe in chaos. There were only two outcomes for Li Tianlan. Either he was killed by the seriously injured Wang Tianzong with a sword strike, or he would be exiled for life for treason. As for the Li family and the Dongqing clan, what greeted them could only be a huge disaster. In addition to seriously injuring or killing Wang Tianzong and becoming famous in the dark world, Li Tianlan had no benefits. It was Deity and the Purgatory of Heaven Capital who benefited. The Purgatory of Heaven Capital was very strong, and so was Deity. And he was in Eastern Europe now. Wang Tianzong was seriously injured. Li Tianlan died. Deity would not let go of Wang Tianzong. He would not let go of the two murderous weapons in Li Tianlan's hands. He would not give up Wulan State either. He killed his biggest opponent and got the two murderous weapons and the control of the 5 countries in Eastern Europe. If Li Tianlan really ignored the overall situation with that sword strike just now, what was in front of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital at this time was all interests. What a pity, Deity sighed, and his voice was a little emotional. He really didn't expect Li Tianlan to be so calm and rational. An opportunity to seriously injure Wang Tianzong was in front of him. He could take action, but he couldn't. Everything was for the overall situation. If he took action with that sword strike just now, Have you ever thought about the Li family in Xianxia State, Your Highness? Daybreak suddenly asked. His question was extremely sharp, but there was no guilt in Deity's tone, only calmness. The Li family in Xianxia State should be destroyed. Deity looked at Li Tianlan's back and said calmly, "The Li family has me. He should sacrifice for the Li family." Daybreak nodded and suddenly laughed. Maybe Li Tianlan thinks so too. Deity did not speak, but looked quietly at the ruins in the distance. Wang Tianzong, who was in the ruins, had walked far away and came to King Tong's side. He took King Tong's hand again and turned to look at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was also looking at him. The two looked at each other. It was an extremely strange but solemn picture. Deity looked at this picture and was speechless. Li Tianlan, Wang Tianzong. These two people basically represented the present and future of the dark world in Xianxia State. The present, the future, they were all shining, like the scorching sun, like the sun in the sky. Deity became more and more indifferent. He suddenly thought of the mysterious His Majesty. If the other party was also put in this picture in front of him, what role would that His Majesty play? Was it the present of Xianxia State? The future? Once. Chapter 453. Deity was looking at Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Daybreak was looking at Deity and Li Tianlan. The cold wind at night in Eastern Europe finally returned to normal. Some faint lights gradually lit up in the desolate and dilapidated castle ruins. This picture was a little desolate and tragic, but it was beautiful. Deity, Li Tianlan, Wang Tianzong. The three of them stood in different positions, but they seemed to be connected in a line. Daybreak looked at this scene and suddenly had an indescribable strange feeling in his heart. This picture is very beautiful. Daybreak suddenly said. This sentence was very simple, but it was also very complicated. It contained many meanings. Deity glanced at him, slowly turned around, and calmly said, "There was an old guy who once said something." His body moved forward. As he moved forward, he moved the huge 3-meter-long sickle beside him. The cold light of the sickle reflected the moonlight and became sharper. But as God's body moved, a drop of blood suddenly dripped down and landed on the sharp and clear scythe. The drop of blood was dark red, and it was a shocking sight. Through Li Tianlan's sword intent and Wang Tianzong's sword, Deity pursed his lips tightly. So the blood turned into a thin line of blood, flowed down the corner of Deity's mouth, and fell on the blade of the sickle. Deity's voice was calm and stubborn. "Everything beautiful will be broken." Daybreak looked at the blood flowing down the blade, and his eyes were complicated and dignified. He didn't know who the old guy in Deity's mouth was. He also knew under what circumstances the Old Highness said this sentence. This was what the Old Highness said when he knew Deity's ambition for the Wang family of Beihai. It came from the bottom of his heart, but it was meaningful. Daybreak moved slowly with Deity and said calmly, "Wang Tianzong is stronger than 3 years ago." Deity nodded. His tone was still calm, without any negative emotions. But this is his limit. For this era, a half-step chosen one is indeed invincible. But if he can't take the last step, what can he do no matter how strong he is? "You're hurt," Daybreak said. What he said was a fact that could not be more obvious. In the final battle of Heaven Capital 3 years ago, Deity and Wang Tianzong were at the peak of the invincible realm at the same time. Wang Tianzong might be a little stronger, but it was almost negligible. But now was completely different from 3 years ago. Wang Tianzong had another breakthrough. In this state, Wang Tianzong was really half a step stronger than Deity. If you take action now and fight Wang Tianzong to the death, how confident are you? Daybreak asked. "I'm not sure." Deity shook his head. He stopped where he was and thought silently for a while. Then he continued, "In your opinion, what was the fundamental reason for the collapse of the Li family?" The problem was huge. The answer was well known. But sometimes, the answer that everyone knew was not necessarily correct. Daybreak looked at Deity and waited for his explanation. "It's not me who committed treason." God said, "Even if there is no case of treason, something else will happen. Maybe it will be something even more shocking. Maybe it will be some small things that add up and cause greater consequences. The root cause of the Li family's collapse was that the Li family was too strong and the old guy was too pedantic. Deity whispered, "So everyone in the world wants the Li family to be destroyed." Summer Solstice easily took advantage of people's hearts. She united with Kunlun City, the Jiang family of South America, and several other superpowers. At that time, the Wang family of Beihai was very dangerous and could be crushed by the Li family at any time. But when Summer Solstice looked for other superpowers to cooperate with, no one would demand an exorbitant price from the Wang family of Beihai because of its situation. Even the Jiang family of South America, which had always been hostile to the Wang family of Beihai, helped the Wang family of Beihai almost for free. Why? Because of the existence of the too strong Li family, no one wanted to see the Wang family of Beihai disappear. Even the hostile forces of the Wang family of Beihai didn't want to see this, because they knew very well that once the Li family annexed the Wang family of Beihai, they would not have a good end. Because the Li family was too strong, everyone in the world wanted to destroy it. Everyone in the world wanted to destroy the Li family. So the Li family was really destroyed. Daybreak vaguely seemed to know what deity meant. So now I have no confidence in Wang Tianzong. I'm not his opponent. But so what? Wang Tianzong is very strong, but not the strongest. The half-step chosen one is invincible in the world, but he doesn't have absolute dominance. How similar is the Wang family of Beihai in this state to the Li family in the past? In the past, the Li family was too strong, so people in the world wanted to destroy the Li family. Now Wang Tianzong is too strong, so people in the world want to kill the Sword Emperor. People in the world want to kill him. What does it matter if I'm not sure? He continued to move forward and said calmly, "Go to see Qin Weibai. I have a hunch that no matter what the situation of the Samsara Palace is in this chaos in Eastern Europe, Qin Weibai will give everyone a surprise." Actually, Daybreak hesitated for a moment. With Qin Weibai's assistance, Tianlan's future achievements will be unimaginable. "Your Highness, deity said in a deep voice. Daybreak gritted his teeth and continued, "So I think that Li Tianlan, with Qin Weibai by his side, is the greatest hope to support the Li family in the future." His voice calmed down. "So I don't understand why you always want to kill him. You even want to kill Qin Weibai. Wiping out the future hope of the Li family, are you reviving the Li family or destroying it? You don't understand." Deity shook his head. "The Li family with Li Tianlan is not what I want. When I returned to Zhongzhou State this time and faced the old guy in Lin, and I just wanted to tell him one thing." Deity laughed. Under the black clothes that covered his face, his voice and expression were extremely paranoid. His voice and expression were extremely paranoid. "The Li family is my Li family. It's also Li Tianlan's." Daybreak said calmly. He was Deity's real confidant and the person who knew him best, so he spoke casually and was not afraid that Deity would suddenly turn against him. Deity's tone was cold. "That's just what you think, no?" Daybreak sneered rudely and said, "Who doesn't think so except you? The Li family used to be yours, and now it's Li Tianlan's. The purgatory of Heaven Capital is yours now, and it will be Li Tianlan's in the future. Almost everyone regards him as the young master. Believe it or not, if you die in the chaos in Eastern Europe, Li Tianlan will take over the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital in the shortest time. This is the truth. What can you prove by saying no?" Deity suddenly stopped. In the dark night, he slowly turned around, looked in the direction of Li Tianlan, and was silent for a long time. Wang Tianzong can't kill Li Tianlan, because Li Tianlan is the marshal of Zhongzhou State. He has scruples and restrictions. But you don't. Isn't the reason why you don't do it because you are hesitating? You are hesitating about the future of you and the Li family. You are not even sure about your future. How can you say that he is not? Deity gently raised his hand. This action interrupted Daybreak's words. Countless sword intents suddenly surged in his hands. The darkness of thousands of meters around shrank wildly. Deity's eyes were cold. In front of the ruins of the castle, Li Tianlan suddenly turned back and looked at the darkness in the distance. Deity kept his hand raised and looked at Li Tianlan, but he did not make a move. But the sword intent all over Li Tianlan suddenly burst out. The sword intent alternating between reality and illusion rose to the sky. A vast and sharp sword light rushed in the direction of Deity in an instant. The night was roaring crazily. Li Tianlan's sword intent burst out, and the whole night sky seemed to suddenly have a surging river across the sky. Li Tianlan's eyes were extremely deep. For the first time since he became the combat capability of the invincible realm, he felt so small. Qin Shilai was also shocked. At this moment, no one knew how many experts were hidden in the ruins of the castle. It was like a replay of the battle between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong with the help of the sword. The sword energy and sword intent intertwined. In an instant, the sword that crossed the night sky was another attack of the peak of the invincible realm. But last time, Li Tianlan used his own sword intent to borrow Deity's sword energy. This time, when Deity was about to kill Li Tianlan, the sword energy suddenly surging in the night sky forcibly borrowed Li Tianlan's sword intent. At this moment, Li Tianlan was not the leader of this sword. Instead, he was completely protected by this huge and incredible sword energy. Li Tianlan knew this sword. Deity also knew this sword. At this time, the sword with the help of Li Tianlan's sword intent was one of the 24 moves of sword. 21st Blade Shatter of Land. 9 Heavens Divine Emperor. Chapter 454. Compared with the instantaneous confrontation between Li Tianlan and Wang Tianzong. Under the curtain of night, the sword that suddenly rose after the end was really unexpected to everyone. No one knew how long this sword had been dormant in the dark. But at this moment, when it suddenly broke out, the sword energy was surging and mighty, and the sharp edge was simply earth-shattering. This was really unexpected. In this battlefield, this sword was simply the most perfect concealment. Because Li Tianlan was here. Because Deity was here. Because this sudden sword was the 24 moves of sword. Li Tianlan and Deity might have felt this trace of sword energy. Li Tianlan thought this was Deity's sword. And Deity also thought this was Li Tianlan's sword. Neither of them thought that there would be a third sword energy that belonged to the 24 moves of sword on this battlefield. So after Wang Tianzong left, when Deity almost made up his mind to attack Li Tianlan, this sword broke out without warning but hysterically. The sword light was straight and thick. It was like a startling rainbow in the night sky, and also like a surging river. The wild sword energy kept flying from all corners of the night. Li Tianlan's sword intent began to surge uncontrollably. In an instant, the sky and the earth were full of sword light. A crazy sword. A decisive sword. Every ray of flowing light was filled with determination. Deity still stretched out his hand. Before he made a move, this almost overwhelming sword had directly arrived in front of him. Deity's figure stood straight, looking mysterious and majestic. But his face under the black clothes looked a little stunned. Daybreak was right. He did not have any constraints, but it did not mean that he had no concerns. Now that he killed Li Tianlan, he also had to consider a lot of things. So when the sword light gathered in his palm, he also had hesitation in his heart. But he did not expect that this sword that was dormant in the dark was so decisive. When he was still hesitating, the other party had already made a move. The sword energy was surging, crazy, and violent. This sword was like a warning, but also like the beginning of the final battle. The meaning was obvious. You can't kill Li Tianlan. You can't even have this kind of thought. So domineering. Deity suddenly raised his palm. The sword qi, which had been condensed to the extreme, blossomed in his palm, like a sharp and beautiful flower. Before anyone could react, the two sword intents collided. A chaotic buzzing sound rang out between heaven and earth. A chaotic and hazy light suddenly appeared on the mountain far away from the ruins. The curtain of night was no longer pure, and the light was no longer dazzling. A large area of space fluctuated like a turbulent sea, turning into ripples that spread out layer by layer. The ripples were silent, but wherever they passed, everything turned into flying dust. A cold moon suddenly rose in the space that was completely filled by the two sword lights. The cold moon was very small, but the moment it appeared, it truly replaced the starlight in the sky. Deity raised the huge sickle in his hand. The light on the scythe flowed, and the nearby space was subtly distorted. Eventually, it became the unique skill of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, which rarely appeared in the Dark World. Galaxy Silver. The scythe turned into a cold moon and spun wildly. A large area of broken void collapsed inward in an instant, and the starlight all over the sky seemed to be constantly shaking down. There was only a very vague figure in Deity's eyes. He could not see the other party's face or figure. The other party was clearly in front of him, close at hand, but it seemed to be the whole world. Only the sword light was constantly surging in front of him. The spinning scythe whistled wildly in the void. Deity narrowed his eyes. In the face of this inexplicable and abrupt sword, his palm seemed to move, but also seemed to not move. But after being shattered by the two-sword chi, the void that had been trying to spread around suddenly stagnated. Heartless seal. Infinite seal. Holy punishment seal. There was a wild sound in an instant in the silent void. The whole void was completely distorted in an instant, turning into vortexes one after another. The vortexes converged into a storm. The entire storm was constantly twisting and spinning in the silent void, like a giant dragon rising in the night sky. It looked incomparably real. Deity's figure gradually disappeared. The spinning scythe also disappeared completely. The storm kept splitting. Hundreds of them danced densely under the night sky, almost making reality occupy the whole void. From a distance, there seemed to be gray beams of light swimming in the night sky one after another. Every beam of light was sword intent. The sword intent at the peak of the invincible realm. And the sword light that suddenly rose seemed to have disappeared in the sudden outbreak of the hurricane. But in the center of countless storms, there was still the sound of gold and iron colliding. The sound was harsh and almost resounded throughout the city. Li Tianlan looked at everything in his sight. For the first time, there was undisguised shock in his eyes. He was not shocked by Deity's absolute power. It was the sword that suddenly rose to protect him behind. This sword was the 24 moves of sword. There were many paths in the 24 moves of sword, but the sword intent that evolved to the extreme was reality and illusion. This was the path of the chosen one that all the top figures in the Dark World knew. But everyone's reality and illusion were different. Deity's sword intent represented reality. Li Tianlan also had his own real sword intent. The two kinds of sword intent seemed to be similar, but the subtle difference represented different directions. And now, in the real storm that Deity could destroy everything, the nature of the break of land that suddenly rose was completely revealed. Deity's sword was real. As for the shatter of mountains and rivers, it was illusory. The most important thing was, this was Li Tianlan's own kendo. It was his own kendo. If he broke through the invincible realm, this sword move of his would probably be the same as this one. There would be no essential difference. This was definitely not what the other side could do with his sword intent. In other words, the sword that suddenly rose in the dark was Li Tianlan's kendo. From sword energy to sword intent, it was almost perfect. So the strength and realm of this sword move were not as good as Deity's. But in that terrible storm, the sword intent of nothingness always existed. Li Tianlan stared at the night sky in the distance. Whose sword was this? From the unique skill of the break of land, there were only a few candidates. It was impossible for Grandpa. He had fallen to the invincible realm. It was also impossible for Lin Fengting. His strength did not need to borrow sword intent. Deity was in front of him. In this way, there was only one candidate left. The master of Samsara Palace. But Li Tianlan could clearly judge the strength of this sword move. In terms of the sharpness of sword energy, this sword move was at most equivalent to the invincible realm who had stabilized his realm. There was still a long way to go from the peak of the invincible realm. So this sword move borrowed his sword intent, combined with sword energy, and finally raised the power to the level close to the peak of the invincible realm. If this sword move came from the master of Samsara Palace, Didn't that mean that the master of Samsara Palace, who ranked 4th on the divine list, had just stabilized her realm of the invincible realm? How was this possible? Crack. A clear cracking sound suddenly sounded in the storm that suppressed the illusion. Countless terrifying storms disappeared completely in an instant. Deity's figure reappeared in the air with a sickle in his hand. A broken sword edge fell in front of him. The sword edge broke into countless pieces and fell down. Finally, it turned into ashes and scattered with the wind. Deity silently looked at the ashes of the broken sword edge. He didn't know this sword, but he was sure that it definitely belonged to the ranks of famous swords. But now the sword had been shattered. Where was the person? Playing tricks, Deity suddenly said. Deity suddenly said. His voice was clearly heard all over the place. Li Tianlan suddenly felt that this sentence was really ironic. Deity slowly turned around and looked at Li Tianlan. His eyes flickered. Finally, he walked toward Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan stood there stiffly, looking at Deity who was getting closer and closer. The distance between the two was getting closer and closer. Hundreds of meters. 100 meters. Dozens of meters. The sword intent on Deity rose again, sharp and ruthless. But what responded to Deity was another surge of sword energy that was even crazier than before. All the sword energy completely wrapped Li Tianlan. Every move conveyed a clear meaning to Deity. If you want to kill him, you can't do it unless I die. Deity snorted coldly. The sword energy that protected Li Tianlan was always silent. The silence was so warm. The one who helped you is the master of Samsara Palace. Deity suddenly said. This was the only candidate he could think of, but he was not sure. It was not until this moment that Deity suddenly remembered that he had never seen the master of Samsara Palace. He only saw Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai's will was the will of the master of Samsara Palace. This had become a consensus in the dark world. So the master of Samsara Palace was silent for a longer and longer time, so that Qin Weibai's existence was getting stronger and stronger. But no matter how small the master of Samsara Palace was, no one dared to look down on him. Deity was sure that in terms of the nature of the sword just now, there was still a long way to go before he reached the peak of the invincible realm. If the real level of the master of Samsara Palace was really like this, then she could not have defeated Gu Xingyun. But now he was the only candidate in Deity's heart. That was why he came over to test Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan looked at Deity quietly. His eyes were quiet and deep. In the long silence, he did not answer Deity's question, but asked softly, "Who are you?" Deity's eyes seemed to fluctuate, and even the sword intent on his body subconsciously restrained a little. "I am Deity," he said calmly. "You are related to the Li family." Li Tianlan said. Deity paused and remained silent. Silence itself was acquiescence. Li Tianlan laughed self-deprecatingly. "You are related to the Li family. Why do you want to kill me?" Deity was silent for a long time before he said calmly, "The Li family betrayed me. Xianxia state betrayed me." Li Tianlan fell silent. Deity suddenly seemed to lose interest. He thought of Li Tianlan's situation and suddenly smiled. The sword intent on his body had completely disappeared, and he became a little bleak. "I won't kill you for the time being, but in the chaos of Eastern Europe, from the inside to the outside, there are dangers everywhere around you. Li Tianlan, let me ask you, the chaos of Eastern Europe has come to an end. If Xianxia state betrays you, what will you do?" This question hit the key point that everyone cared about. Everyone present looked at Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was silent and looked into Deity's eyes. After a long time, he said calmly, "Xianxia state did not betray me, and I did not betray Xianxia state." He still did not answer Deity's question. But his answer was enough to explain everything. The first sentence that he did not betray Xianxia state was that Xianxia state did not betray him. Deity laughed. "I will watch Xianxia state," he said slowly. "If the ending is not what you hope, I will have a drink with you before you die." He looked around and said loudly, "Your Highness, Palace Master, why don't you come out and meet me?" There was still silence in the wilderness. In the illusory sword intent, Even Deity could not find where the other party was. Deity waited for a while, nodded silently, pointed to Li Tianlan, and then slowly turned around. In the ruins of ruin, in the silent night, lights began to appear at the foot of the mountain. The mountains were roaring and shaking. The smell of smoke and blood was carried by the night wind. It was incomparably tragic. The crazy and solemn killing intent roared from the foot of the mountain. One figure after another appeared at the foot of the mountain. Deity did not look back and moved forward silently. His footsteps were neither fast nor slow. He looked a little lonely, but he was not lonely. Li Tianlan looked at him for a long time, then slowly turned around and said calmly, "Go down the mountain." There were very few people on the mountain. Li Tianlan, Qin Shilai, Angel, the Holy Virgin of the Vatican, as well as several saint warriors. Li Tianlan moved forward slowly. When he passed by Angel, he suddenly glanced at her. His voice gradually became gentle, with a strong sense of modesty and apology. "Your Highness, I'm sorry for what happened tonight. I'm also sorry for the death of Chaos, but the Snowdance Corps also has the sincerity of the Snowdance Corps, so please convey my apology to His Majesty the Pope, Your Highness." Angel looked at Li Tianlan. In her sight, it was a sincere face. But Angel smelled a faint trace of hypocrisy and coldness. The death of Chaos was definitely an accident. An invincible realm expert was a real big shot in the Vatican. The Vatican was willing to pay a lot to ease the relationship with Xianxia state, but the life of Chaos was definitely not the price the Vatican was willing to pay. But Angel couldn't say anything now. In the face of such a Li Tianlan, in the face of a marshal of Xianxia state who put Xianxia state not letting him down first, Angel wasn't sure what would happen to her if she turned against him. Even if she had a very subtle relationship with Situ Wanjia. Ambitious? Or treacherous? Angel looked at Li Tianlan. She was silent for a while, and then said softly, "The sincerity of the Vatican will not change. Your Highness, I'm willing to go with you tonight." Li Tianlan's eyes lit up, and a smile flashed through the depths of his eyes. Angel saw the smile, but she felt cold all over. "Go down the mountain." Li Tianlan turned around and said it again. The people going down the mountain went down the mountain. The people going up the mountain went up the mountain. The two sides finally met on the mountainside. In a strong, almost suffocating atmosphere of blood and fire, a figure covered in blood slowly walked to the front of a large number of people going up the mountain. He held a flag tightly in his hand and seemed to use all his strength. He said in a loud voice, "Li Zhonghu, the commander of the Thunderbolt Division of the Snowdance Corps of Xianxia State, reporting." It was 8:05 in the evening of August 7th in Eastern Europe. It was the 15th hour since Li Tianlan arrived in Eastern Europe. Li Tianlan looked at Li Zhonghu, who was covered in blood in front of him, at the flag in his hand, and at the large number of people behind him. The corners of his mouth twitched fiercely, and his eyes became extremely cruel in an instant. There was indeed a large group of people in front of him. The 5,000 elites of the Thunderbolt Division marched into Wulan State in 2 batches. There were 3,000 people in the first batch. Now there were less than 600 people standing in front of him at a rough glance. Li Tianlan took a deep breath, reached out, and took the military flag from Li Zhonghu's hand. The military flag was scarlet, but the stars on both sides of the military flag shone more brightly in the night sky. Li Tianlan stared at the military flag in his hand and was silent for a long time. Amidst the silence, less than 600 elites arranged themselves in formation in front of him. In the endless exhaustion, everyone revealed an almost fanatical arrogance and fighting spirit. Li Tianlan held the military flag and looked at the army in front of him, the army that belonged to him. He looked from the army to the distance and finally looked at Reki City. In the sight of hundreds of people, Li Tianlan held the military flag, pointed in the direction of Reki City, and said calmly, "Follow me." Chapter 455. It was about 50 kilometers from Rekvia Castle to Reki City. The truck of the Snowdance Corps was parked at the foot of the mountain. Li Tianlan and the others sat in the carriage modified like the headquarters. It was not until halfway through the journey that he finished listening to Li Zhonghu's report and understood the whole process of the march. There was a straight line distance of nearly 800 kilometers from Aim to Reki City. The 3,000 elites at the front of the Snowdance Corps marched at dawn. It took them 15 hours to cross the border between Ras State and Oga State and enter Wulan State. The war broke out. The 3,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps ran amok in Wulan State regardless of the consequences. In the end, they fought a miraculous war in the history of nearly 100 years of war. They were invincible and stained with blood all the way. In less than 5 hours, 3,000 people pierced through 3 large legions of Wulan State, including a joint legion, a heavy firepower legion, and an elite field legion in Wulan State. The price of creating this miracle was 3,000 elites. To be specific, after a total of 3,181 elites of the Snowdance Corps arrived in Reki City, there were only 537 people left. In this battle, more than 80% of them died in battle. Under the suppression of the artillery fire all over the sky, they defeated 60,000 enemies. Li Zhonghu did not retreat. No one in the Snowdance Corps retreated. They marched forward bravely. The morale of the army was as strong as iron. This was the real invincible army in the world. As Dongqing Wudi once said in the Border Control Corps, this was a legion with no retreat and no last resort. Now these people came to the Snowdance Corps. In the land of Eastern Europe, there was still no retreat and no so-called last resort. Li Tianlan clenched his hands tightly subconsciously. He listened to Li Zhonghu's report and did not speak for a long time. 2,000 elites of the Snowdance Corps. Their predecessors were all the Thunderbolt Battalion hidden in various armies of the Border Control Corps by Dongqing Wudi. The Thunderbolt Battalion was the most elite force in Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State was the most powerful country in the world. Therefore, the Thunderbolt Battalion could be said to be the most elite and powerful force in the world. At its peak, the Thunderbolt Battalion was no more than 20,000. Dongqing Wudi had hidden half of them. Now, in the Battle of Eastern Europe, more than 1/5 of them were lost in one day. The light in Li Tianlan's eyes gradually changed, and an indescribable emotion rose in his heart. It was an indescribable brutality and cruelty. He quietly stared at the big screen in the carriage. On the big screen was the picture of the streets of Reki City at this time. The entire city was incomparably silent. The streets and alleys were ablaze with flames and scattered wreckage. Corpses were silent and fresh blood flowed quietly. Li Tianlan looked at Reki City outside, and his eyes were extremely cold. Light footsteps could be heard. Dongqing Rushi, who had simply treated Li Tianlan's wound, walked over with light steps. She put a piece of candy in Li Tianlan's mouth and whispered, "This is for you." Li Tianlan froze for a moment. With the candy stuffed into his mouth, he suddenly felt a little confused. Everyone present was a little confused. "The toffee is sweet." Li Tianlan swallowed, coughed, and looked around. Lin Yuxian, who looked a little tired and pale, was sitting in the corner smoking. Seeing Li Tianlan's gaze, he threw a cigarette over. As soon as Li Tianlan stretched out his hand, a tender white hand suddenly reached out and took the cigarette. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Rushi. Dongqing Rushi thought for a moment, put away the cigarette, and took out a piece of toffee. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched. He stood up and went straight to the silent and calm middle-aged general in the corner. "General, thank you very much. They defeated 60,000 enemies with 3,000 people. Such a miracle certainly showed that the Thunderbolt Battalion of the Border Control Corps was invincible in the world. But if there were not enough experts to support them, the result today would undoubtedly be more tragic. General of 9 Heavens, Li Wangxing, Lieutenant General of 9 Regions, Lin Yuxian, Dongqing Rushi, Suchu, and 2 groups of the most mysterious terracotta army in Zhongzhou State. Everything came together. Only then did they fight this war that was enough to stun everyone." He glanced at him, slowly shook his head, and said indifferently, "It's my duty." Li Tianlan nodded. The other party's attitude was not indifferent. Perhaps it was this kind of indifferent attitude that could be regarded as a real neutral attitude. He patted Li Wangsheng on the shoulder hard, slowly turned around and said, "Speed up. Go to the office of the president." The truck convoy carrying the elites of Zhongzhou State suddenly roared and began to speed up. Li Tianlan stood steadily in front of the huge screen in the carriage, deep in thought. On the ordinary and unusual night of August 7th in Eastern Europe, under the focus of countless eyes, two things shook the whole dark world almost at the same time. The fall of the invincible realm. The fall of Wulan province. In one day, three invincible realm experts, Jiang Chenyan, Black Ghost, and Chaos, died. The Jiang family of South America, which suffered heavy losses, became the first superpower to completely withdraw from the chaos in Eastern Europe. The Snowdance Corps, from top to bottom, showed a sharpness that made most people shudder. Two invincible realm experts died in Li Tianlan's hands. Li Tianlan was just 22 years old this year and had not yet entered the invincible realm. The Snowdance Corps led by him completed the feat of running hundreds of kilometers in one day and defeating 60,000 people from Wulan State, Ross State, and Oga State with 3,000 people. After this battle, the future of Ross State and Oga State, which were already weak, was even more uncertain. In Wulan State, which was said to be a vast and resourceful country in Eastern Europe, two of the four ace corps in the country were directly destroyed. In just a few hours, in the face of the elites of the Snowdance Corps, Wulan State almost used up its war potential for the next 10 years. It was not until then that Li Tianlan truly felt the general trend, which was powerful enough to sweep everything roaring past him. In the general trend, he was no longer a powerless bystander. He had mastered enough power to be taken seriously, and he already had the qualification to try to lead the general trend. Li Tianlan's eyes changed from cruelty to calmness. His voice sounded in the carriage. "Inform Wulan State, Oga State, and Ross State. I'll give them 3 days." Li Tianlan said calmly, "Let their high-level military leaders personally escort the bodies of the victims of the Snowdance Corps to Reki City." His voice paused, with bloody coldness and majesty between the lines. 2,644 corpses. "In 3 days I'll destroy one of their towns for one person less. I'll destroy one of their cities for one less team." At this moment, Li Tianlan was extremely quiet, but his whole body was full of killing intent. Li Zonghu grinned grimly and nodded. "Understood." Li Tianlan swallowed the milk candy in his mouth and said lightly, "Contact Chen Qinghuan." Chen Qinghuan was the deputy commander of the Snowdance Corps, but he had been out of this operation. Li Tianlan, who had absolute military power, was in Eastern Europe. If he wanted to turn Chen Qinghuan into a decoration, it was only a matter of a word. Of course, Chen Qinghuan's position was there. If he wanted to turn himself into a knife to stab into Li Tianlan's heart at the right time, it would not be too difficult. What Li Tianlan needed to do now was to stay away from this knife. The soldier next to the big screen sent a signal in silence. Chen Qinghuan, who had been paying close attention to the situation of Wulan State in all day, quickly connected the communication. His face appeared on the screen. Although he was smiling, it looked a little far-fetched. "Your Highness is really amazing in Reki City. In this battle, you have shown the prestige of Zhongzhou State and the Snowdance Corps. Qinghuan admires you very much." Chen Qinghuan gave Li Tianlan a standard military salute. In the time it took to say one sentence, his expression had completely returned to normal. Li Tianlan didn't bother to look at his face. He smiled lightly and said, "It's all because the deputy commander is in the rear that I have less to worry about." Chen Qinghuan smiled with a complicated meaning. Obviously, he didn't want to be polite with Li Tianlan, so he asked directly, "What can I do for you, Your Highness?" "2 things. Chen Qinghuan said calmly. "First, Fireman and the 2 sword masters of Mount Shu went out of the city to meet the Snowdance Corps and enter Reki City. Fireman was seriously injured and now has to go back to to recuperate. The old man is old. Please take good care of him, Deputy Commander." Chen Qinghuan's face stiffened for a moment. He suddenly felt that something was wrong, but he couldn't tell what was wrong. After his thoughts froze for a moment, he nodded subconsciously. "Second, in the near future, I will continue to transfer some of the elites of the Snowdance Corps to Wulan State to control the situation. The number of people is about 10,000. I will sign the transfer order, and I will communicate with the Arctic Ocean Command in terms of armaments. As for IM, it is also very important. It was our first garrison base in Eastern Europe, and we can't afford to lose it. I believe in the ability of the deputy commander. During the days when I am not here, I will trouble you to take care of IM. Chen Qinghuan finally understood what was wrong. Now that Li Tianlan had conquered Wulan State, all the interests of Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe would be transferred to Wulan State. There were large amounts of interests and opportunities there. More than just the military would move there. The businesses of countless wealthy families in Zhongzhou State, even the gray businesses, would try to get a piece of the pie. That was undoubtedly a feast. And this feast had nothing to do with Chen Qinghuan. Li Tianlan transferred 10,000 people of the Snowdance Corps again. In addition to the 5,000 taken by Li Zhonghu, Li Tianlan almost took away all his confidence. As for the 5,000 people left in IM, they were all Chen Qinghuan's subordinates. With a few simple words, Li Tianlan directly left him in IM. Chen Qinghuan suddenly said. His voice was very loud, and he seemed to be excited for a moment. Li Tianlan laughed. Your Highness, I think I should go to Reki City now. The situation there is complicated. Maybe I can help deal with it a little. No need. Li Tianlan calmly interrupted Chen Qinghuan's words. If the deputy commander stays in IM, it will be the greatest help to me. The superficial meaning of this was very simple. The internal meaning was even more simple. Chen Qinghuan's face changed. He gritted his teeth and continued, Your Highness, I have to go to Reki City. I have something important to report to His Majesty the Sword Emperor. Something important? I can pass it on for you. Li Tianlan did not give in. It's about Beihai, Deputy Commander. Li Tianlan's eyes turned cold. Remember your identity. You are now the Deputy Commander of the Snowdance Corps, not a high-level member of the Beihai Corps. Beihai Province has a strong foundation. What do you need to worry about? What you need to do most now is to hold on to IM. As for your private affairs, I will find a chance to communicate with the Sword Emperor. You just need to wait for the news. Chen Qinghuan trembled slightly, and he was so angry that he laughed. He looked at the indifferent but young face on the screen and couldn't help retorting, I don't think my business is a private matter, Your Highness. Whether you agree or not, I must go to Reki City. You have the right to choose. Li Tianlan nodded. Stay in IM. This is an order. You can choose to obey the order, and everyone will live in peace. You can also choose to disobey the military order, and I will enforce the military law. Before Li Tianlan hung up the communication, he said coldly, Deputy Commander, take care. Chapter 456. Chen Qinghuan still had a choice. But from the first second Li Tianlan stepped into Reki City, the entire Wulan state had no choice. What was even more tragic was that many of the high-level personnel who were given great hope by the people of Wulan state did not realize this. The high-level meeting of Wulan state from morning to evening was coming to an end. The quarrel was also nearing its climax. News from the outside world would be transmitted to the conference room every few minutes. Li Tianlan was still 20 kilometers away from the office of the president. The conference room was in a mess and noisy. Rational politicians had begun to analyze the future situation of Wulan state after admitting defeat to Zhongzhou state. The hot-tempered soldiers were still clamoring for a fight. President Carlos of Wulan state sat quietly in his seat and watched coldly. The politicians who advocated peace were led by Prime Minister Riker of Wulan state. The hardliners who advocated war were General Joel of Wulan state. When Wulan state was calm, both President Carlos and Prime Minister Riker liked General Joel very much. General Joel was nearly 60 years old this year. He was valiant, upright, and strict in managing the army. He held a high position but was simple and incorruptible. He could be said to be a model of the entire military of Wulan state, or an anomaly. Many people in Wulan state didn't like General Joel, but they all respected him. When the shadow of Rekvia shrouded Wulan State wanted to do something from the standpoint of the country. General Joel was the best bargaining chip that Wulan State used to resist the pressure of Rekvia. Therefore, even in the field of military defense, General Joel was the best candidate to balance General Tostel Rekvia. Both the president and the prime minister relied on the general very much. But at this moment, Prime Minister Riker felt that although General Joel was brave, he was not wise enough. The battle reports from the front line kept coming, which had already shocked the entire Dark World. Wulan State had a large territory in Europe, but it was not a powerful country. Its military power was limited. Now, more than half of its elite troops had been defeated by the other party in one day. Advocate war? This was indeed a good idea. But how to fight? Prime Minister Riker looked up at the old general in his sight. The general stood there and expressed his views passionately. The Prime Minister's eyes gradually became cold. He suddenly knocked on the table heavily, and his tone was obviously impatient and irritated. Enough, General. The entire venue suddenly fell silent for a moment. The Prime Minister took a deep breath, suppressed the emotions in his heart, and said in an indifferent tone, "Everyone understands your passion. But please also understand what reality is. The current situation is that the enemy's 3,000 troops have completely broken up the 3 elite legions that our Wulan State has spent a lot of money to cultivate. You may be right. After the war, the enemy has suffered a lot of losses and is very tired. Li Tianlan may have been seriously injured. Now that we mobilize the limited army in Reki City, we may still be qualified to fight with them. We may even win." The Prime Minister's tone became more and more serious. "But can you make Li Tianlan stay? Kill him? Who could do it? And you seem to have forgotten that Wang Tianzong has now appeared in Reki City." General Joel's aura instantly weakened. But immediately after, his aura rose once again. Intentionally or unintentionally, he ignored the topic about Wang Tianzong and directly retorted, "We may not be able to keep Li Tianlan, but so what? As long as we repel them tonight, we can win." Prime Minister Riker was so angry that he laughed. He lit a cigar, took a deep breath, and said expressionlessly, "Tell me your reason." "Li Tianlan is seriously injured. As long as we repel them tonight, it will definitely take time for them to fight back. What Wulan State needs now is time. Mr. Prime Minister, we still have a very powerful force. We are the largest country in Europe except for Snow Country, and we have a lot of troops. In the past 10 years, we have nearly 400,000 retired soldiers. As long as I have time, I can recruit more than 200,000 retired soldiers in the shortest time and reorganize several large legions. At that time, victory will definitely belong to Wulan State." General Joel's voice was loud and firm. More than 200,000 retired soldiers. 200,000 troops had exceeded the total number of soldiers in the military of Wulan State at present. Many high-level officials who were in favor of war seemed to be persuaded and were talking about it. The Prime Minister looked at him silently as if he were looking at an idiot. All the high-level officials who were in favor of peace also looked at Joel as if they were looking at an idiot. "Good idea." The Prime Minister was silent for a while, then nodded and said lightly, "But what about armaments?" General Joel was an anomaly at the upper level, but he had an unparalleled reputation at the grassroots level of the military. The Prime Minister believed that he could recruit more than 200,000 retired soldiers in the shortest time. But where were the armaments needed for such a large number of soldiers? Under normal circumstances, Wulan State was in a bad situation today, and some powerful countries in Western Europe would definitely help Wulan State in order to guard the door. But tonight, King Tong appeared here and was taken away by Wang Tianzong, which already showed the attitude of the Shadow Throne. The attitude of the Shadow Throne represented the attitude of Western Europe. So it was impossible for them to get arms from Western Europe. As for the Rekvia family, Rekvia was the focus of the battle between the Snowdance Corps and the Jiang family of South America. Now the Jiang family of South America had suffered a crushing defeat. As long as Rekvia did not die, they all knew how to fight, so it was difficult for Wulan State to get arms from Rekvia. The largest arms dealer in Europe could be said to be the Violet family of Snow Country. But at this point, both the Violet and Morton families remained silent about everything in Wulan State. The reason was very simple. In the case of Rekvia's subtle attitude, neither of the two families was willing to make the first move, because there was still the Qin clan between the two families and Wulan State. So they did not have enough armaments to arm hundreds of thousands of troops. Even if they emptied Wulan State's inventory and barely equipped everyone with weapons, Wulan State did not have the courage to really fight a war with Zhongzhou State. Their declaration of war was nothing more than to create pressure on Zhongzhou State. Were they really going to fight? Not to mention the invincible army of the Snowdance Corps that shocked the world. The garrison of the Arctic Ocean Command alone was enough to crush Wulan State. Eastern Europe was in chaos. If Wulan State was really determined to fight to the death, it was obvious whether the major powers that were exerting pressure on Zhongzhou State with Wulan State today would attack Zhongzhou State or come to Eastern Europe to take advantage of it. However, the Prime Minister was sure that the reckless general in front of him did not understand this. So he just asked a simple and straightforward question that hit the nail on the head. How to get the armaments? Everyone in the pro-war faction was stunned for a moment. Except for General Joel. An obscure and subtle light flashed in the eyes of this upright general, who was praised as a living hero by the military of Wulan State, and he seemed to be hesitating. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, what if I can provide a batch of armaments that are enough to arm 50,000 people? Arm 50,000 people with armaments. This was not a small number for any country in force. The Prime Minister suddenly froze and looked at the general in front of him. At this moment, the old general in front of him suddenly became a little strange in his eyes. What specifications? The Prime Minister suddenly asked. The most advanced weapons and equipment from Zhongzhou State, Star State, and Germany, with sufficient bullets and firearms, including some heavy firepower. It will only take 3 days. Within 3 days, this batch of armaments will arrive in Wulan State. General Joel said calmly. At this moment, not only the Prime Minister, but even President Carlos, who had been watching coldly from the sidelines, could not help but be shocked. Take out the armaments for 50,000 people at a time. If there was no advance reservation, it would be a little hasty for any country in force. According to the specifications that Joel had mentioned, few countries in the world could take out a large number of the most advanced armaments. This was the case for all countries. The super forces that could do this were even rarer. The most important thing was the speed that Joel had mentioned. They would arrive in Wulan State within 3 days. This further narrowed the range of forces that could do this. In 3 days, what channel would they use to transport this batch of equipment? Just as the Prime Minister's heart thumped with excitement, President Carlos's bright eyes dimmed once again. He closed his eyes as if he was asleep. The Prime Minister was still thinking. But what was there to think about? In Eastern Europe, the 4 families all had the strength to take out this batch of armaments because they were the local tyrants in Eastern Europe. But Rekvia would not take them out. The Qin clan would not take them out. The Qin clan would even stop the Violet and Morton families. In Europe, Rothschild could also take them out. But they were cooperating with the Wang family of Beihai at this time. In this way, the transportation channels of armaments had been blocked. But since this batch of armaments could be sent over, it meant that the other party had channels through these blockades. Violet and Morton couldn't do it. To do this, the only way to send the armaments over was through the channels of Europe and Zhongzhou State. Who else could it be? Who else could it be? The Wang family of Beihai. Carlos opened his eyes and took a deep look at General Joel. The general's eyes were still full of belligerence. But in the eyes of the president, all this had changed. The president smiled self-deprecatingly. Upright and unyielding? A living hero? There were many comments. Behind the bright essence, wasn't he just a dog that was driven by people? Everyone was the same. Carlos suddenly felt a little bored. It was meaningless to sue for peace and to advocate war. Because suing for peace was destined to suffer humiliation. But the so-called advocacy of war was also a plea for peace. Because even if it was a war, it would eventually become a civil war in Zhongzhou State for control of Wulan State. In the end, General Joel was not opposed to suing for peace. What he and the Prime Minister were arguing about was whether to sue for peace with the Wang family of Beihai or the Li family. Carlos closed his eyes again. Your Excellency, where did so many armaments come from? The Prime Minister finally spoke in a serious tone. It doesn't matter. Joel looked at the Prime Minister stubbornly, and his eyes gradually became a little fanatical. Mr. President, Mr. Prime Minister, what matters is that we now have a chance to get rid of the nightmare of Rekvia. If we can beat back Li Tianlan tonight, we can. Who said that we are a nightmare? A voice suddenly rang out, directly interrupting York's words. All the people present, including President Carlos, froze, whether they were suing for peace or advocating war. This voice was very familiar to everyone, because this voice also belonged to the high-level officials of Wulan State. Even among this group of high-level officials, only the owner of this voice could be regarded as a high-level official. The top defense general of Wulan State, General Tostel Rekvia. In the unhurried footsteps, Tostel's figure slowly appeared in everyone's sight. He was dressed in a neat suit, and his eyes were haggard, but his whole face was full of excitement and rosy. The word, high-spirited, was almost placed on Tostel's face. Everyone was a little strange to Tostel like this. It was not the high spirit on his face that was strange. It was his humility. He was very excited. But when he walked in, he bent slightly, stood at the door, and made a gesture of please. Everyone's heart sank. The sound of footsteps became clearer and clearer. Two figures walked into the conference room one after another. Tostel followed quietly, low-key and respectful. President Carlos, who was sitting in the main seat, opened his eyes again and looked at the young man walking in front. He was really young. Carlos's eyes were a little dazed. The black suit was obviously just changed, straight and neat. The young and even delicate face was a little pale, but his eyes were extremely calm. The silver bracelet was on his left hand, shining with sharpness. His body was straight. At first glance, Carlos could only see an almost invincible sharpness. The dark swordmaster and Tostel from Eastern Europe followed behind him, one on the left and the other on the right. Carlos watched quietly and looked into the young man's eyes for a moment. Introduce yourself. The young man's voice was calm and soft. He stood up straight and gave a symbolic salute to all the high-level officials of Wulan State. I'm Li Tianlan, the commander of the Snowdance Corps of Zhongzhou State. His voice resounded directly in the conference room through the synchronous translator. There was a commotion in the conference room, but then it became quiet. You should thank me, Li Tianlan said calmly. If it weren't for me, Wulan State might be different tonight. His expression was bland, and he said it very calmly. Everyone, I want to announce a piece of news. Tostel took half a step forward and said in a heavy tone, late this night, Rekvia's former partner, the Jiang family of South America, betrayed our cooperation treaty. Jiang Qianyan of the Jiang family of South America even tried to kill my brother, Patriarch Xianxia. At the critical moment, it was His Highness Li Tianlan who saved my brother. But the Jiang family of South America has a deep foundation. Although His Highness escorted my brother to Rekvia's castle, the crazy Jiang family of South America directly turned the castle into ruins. His Highness was seriously injured in the process of covering our departure. Unfortunately, my brother was attacked and killed by the masters of the Jiang family of South America in the process of retreat. This is very regrettable news, but fortunately, Rekvia and Wulan State are still there. Although we have suffered a great disaster, I believe that with the help of the Snowdance Corps, we will soon be able to shit. A fiery voice suddenly interrupted Tostel's words. Joel, with a ferocious face, finally couldn't stand the other party's nonsense and stood up directly. He pointed at Li Tianlan fiercely and said angrily, "It is clear that he attacked the Jiang family of South America and the Rekvia family, and even killed Xianxia. Tostel, are you General Joel?" Li Tianlan suddenly interrupted Joel's roar. Joel gave him a cold look. Li Tianlan waved his hand. Qin Shilai handed a file bag to Li Tianlan. I have some information here. Li Tianlan opened the file bag and threw the information inside on the conference table in front of him. These materials are enough to show General Joel's true position. Everyone, the hero in your heart is actually a traitor and a lackey raised by other forces. I have some remittance records between General Joel and some forces. It turns out that in the past 5 years, the general has received a total of nearly 600 million euros in overseas remittances. Every word he said in the conference room today carried the smell of wealth, but it was not the wealth of Wulan state. There was an uproar. Joel's face changed dramatically. He could refute. But the data Li Tianlan said was so accurate that it made him confused for a moment. You're talking nonsense. He raised his voice and roared again. His body trembled, and he pointed to the door with one hand. Get out, you invader. This is the last warning. I give you 5 minutes. If you still stay here, my army, can you still mobilize your army? Li Tianlan said calmly, there are about 31 officers bought by you with money. 3 of them are generals and the rest are all colonels. Like you, they betrayed Wulan state. For the sake of the overall situation, I helped Wulan state deal with all these people. 2 people came to Joel's mind in an instant. Sai City, cool breeze, drifting cloud. His eyes suddenly went black, and for a moment, the world was spinning. Li Tianlan reached out and pulled in the air. The space suddenly shook. Joel's body directly hit him, and Li Tianlan grabbed him by the neck. Traitors should be killed. Li Tianlan's tone was calm. Joel's eyes became extremely frightened in an instant. Let go, I'm bang. Li Tianlan waved his hand and smashed it down hard. Blood spurted out directly. Joel's whole body was smashed into the ground, and his bones were smashed. Li Tianlan couldn't let him say the words, Wang family of Beihai, so he kicked Joel's body away and said expressionlessly, You're a lackey of the Jiang family of South America. Why should I let go? Everyone looked at Li Tianlan. They were thoughtful. Everyone heard the last word of Joel. Bei what? Li Tianlan glanced around with an indifferent expression and suddenly said, When my army helped Wulan state to quell the war, who gave the order to stop my army? There was silence in the conference room. More than 2,000 elite soldiers of mine died in Wulan state. Who gave such an order? Li Tianlan's voice became quieter. Still, no one spoke. Bang! In the dull sound, a high-level official of Wulan state, who was closest to Li Tianlan, suddenly burst into a piece of flesh and blood. Blood and minced meat flew in the conference room, fell on the desk, and sprinkled on several high-level officials closest to him. Who? Li Tianlan asked softly. Your Highness, please calm down. President Carlos, who had been silent for a long time, suddenly spoke. He stood up and bowed deeply to Li Tianlan. The Prime Minister hesitated, stood up, and said with his head lowered, Your Highness, please calm down. Everyone stood up. Your Highness, please calm down. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched, and he walked directly to President Carlos. Perhaps it was the fear of death, or perhaps it was because he was too old. The president subconsciously returned to his position and looked up at Li Tianlan's expressionless young face. Li Tianlan looked at him for a while, then suddenly reached out and knocked on the table in front of him. He said lightly, Get out of the way. This is not your position. Chapter 457. There were many mountains and dense forests outside Reki City. The terrain was complex, and machines had strategic advantages. Within a radius of nearly 100 kilometers outside Reki City, those who were familiar with the terrain could be like fish in water, while those who were unfamiliar with the terrain would be dizzy. The Jiang family of South America had cooperated with Rekvia for many years. Almost every important person in the Jiang family of South America was familiar with the terrain inside and outside Reki City. It was precisely because of the deeper and deeper cooperation between the Jiang family of South America and Rekvia that Jiang Qiansong decided to establish the largest secret base of the Jiang family of South America in Eastern Europe outside Reki City. From the Jiang family of South America to the Rekvia castle to Reki City, in this extremely complex mountainous area, the Jiang family of South America had carefully drawn a highly accurate hidden road. This path, which could not be considered a path, was very difficult to walk. Its greatest advantage was that it was close enough and hidden enough. It was very close to the Wuxia castle. It was very close to Reki City. Because it was close, when the time was right, it was more convenient for them to attack, provide support, and retreat. Jiang Qianzong's speed was not slow to begin with. As an expert on the divine list with the best defense in the world, except for the attack power, he had almost no fatal shortcomings. In addition, he was familiar with the road, so when he rushed out of the Wuxia castle and fled down the mountain, Jiang Qianzong had erased all traces he left behind. He charged forward. All the way forward. After brushing shoulders with death and finally escaping, Jiang Qianzong did not feel lucky at all. All he thought about was the future of the Jiang family of South America. The trip to Eastern Europe was a complete failure, and 2 invincible realm experts died one after another. Although the comprehensive strength of the Jiang family of South America was still there, without 2 invincible realm experts, it felt weak all of a sudden. This speed was simply too fast. Falling from the peak to the bottom in just one day. In the dense forest, Jiang Qianzong, who was running madly, had a cold and venomous look in his eyes. He took out an instrument that looked like a pocket watch and glanced at it. After confirming the route, he continued forward. After tonight, the 3,000 elites of the Jiang family of South America stationed in Wulan State were doomed to lose hope. With his crushing defeat, all the forces of the Jiang family of South America outside Reki City would be devastated. However, things weren't as dire as they seemed. At least he still held the largest base of the Jiang family of South America in Eastern Europe. They had advanced weapons and elite personnel. Although there weren't many of them, they were all loyal and useful people. 30 miles ahead, that base was the greatest hope for the Jiang family of South America to turn the tables in Eastern Europe. Jiang Qianzong took a deep breath and turned to look at the path behind him. Behind him, the wind and waves were calm, and only the sound of insects could be heard. However, clear footsteps suddenly sounded from Jiang Qianzong's left side. Jiang Qianzong, who was already frightened by the mere twang of a bowstring, suddenly turned around and stared at the dense forest on his left. The footsteps sounded unhurriedly. A tall and thin middle-aged man walked out of the forest. He was also holding a tracking device in his hand. He subconsciously shook his head. The deviation is more than 500 meters. It's a little ridiculous. He was a standard European white man, but he was speaking fluent Chinese at this time. Jiang Qianzong looked at him for a while and suddenly felt that he looked familiar. "Mr. Jiang, long time no see." The middle-aged man glanced at Jiang Qianzong and suddenly laughed. "Perhaps you have forgotten my name? But it doesn't matter. On such an occasion, I prefer to be called by my code name. Let me introduce myself. I'm a follower." Jiang Qianzong had never heard of a follower, but he suddenly remembered the other's true identity. Second Elder Mellad. His voice was erratic and unpredictable. "This is really surprising." The follower looked at him quietly and smiled without saying a word. "But it's not difficult to understand. Rothschild and the Wang family of Beihai joined hands, so Li Tianlan naturally needed a powerful ally. What did he give you?" The space in front of Jiang Qianzong fluctuated faintly, like a breeze or a ripple. "Mr. Jiang, you can't do anything to me," the follower said unhurriedly. Jiang Qianzong narrowed his eyes, and the coldness in them became sharper. "But now we are enemies. Because my tracking device's route is off by 500 meters. This is too exaggerated." The follower laughed softly. At this moment, he was completely different from the second elder in the Holy Disarmament Corps. He was very soft, but there was a kind of twisted and weird evil in his voice. Jiang Qianzong froze for a moment, and his heart suddenly sank. When he escaped, the experts of the Vatican had not yet gone up the mountain. To some extent, Mellad in front of him was likely to be the one who chased after him. His route was off by about 500 meters, and the distance was bound to get farther and farther. But even so, when Jiang Qianzong was about to get close to the base, the other party could still catch up. What did this mean? This meant that the other party's speed was far better than his. Could it also be understood that the other party's strength was still above his? How could it be possible? My lad? And we are not enemies. As I said, I am a follower. Jiang Qiansong didn't know what the code name of follower meant, and he didn't bother to think about it. He just wanted to get back to the base as soon as possible. Not enemies? He sneered. Well, it sounds true. Get out of the way, and we are not enemies. At this time, I don't recommend you, the follower said. But his voice suddenly disappeared. His mouth was still moving, but the whole world seemed to have suddenly lost its voice and became extremely silent. A silent world. The sword of nothingness. The sword energy broke the space, and in an instant, it was like a storm. The whole space was twisted in the storm-like sword energy. Large tracts of trees were broken, wood chips were flying, and dust was flying. In the silence, the scene in front of him was like the whole world was disintegrating and turning into nothingness. A sword edge appeared in the world of nothingness. The sword edge was like a beam of light, and in the blink of an eye, it directly arrived in front of the follower. All the words of the follower were forcibly suppressed by the sword energy. In the crazy whistling sword energy, the follower opened his hands and suddenly put them together. Crack! There was a slight crisp sound in the air. The huge force suddenly collided with the monstrous sword energy. The terrifying force turned into shock waves, sweeping in all directions. Jiang Qiansong dodged the strongest shock wave, and his face was a little gloomy. A figure dressed in black appeared in his line of sight. His whole body was wrapped in a black cloak, and it was completely impossible to tell his gender. He could only see a slightly chubby figure holding a sword and stabbing forward. His whole body was full of unparalleled sharpness. Jiang Qiansong had seen this figure before. Many people had seen him. But this was the most low-key invincible realm expert in the Dark World. An invincible realm expert who should have died in the deep sea. Samsara Palace. The master of Samsara Palace. The follower was motionless. He put his hands together. The moment the two hands joined, he tightly clamped the long sword in the hand of the master of Samsara Palace. Jiang Qiansong hesitated for a moment. This should have been the most hidden way. Now it was known by the Vatican and the Samsara Palace. He already had doubts about the secrecy of that base. But he had no choice. That was the only chance for him to turn the tables in Eastern Europe. So he gritted his teeth, glanced at the follower and the master of Samsara Palace, and turned to leave. The follower seemed to want to say something. But the endless sword energy burst out in an instant. There was light in the dark forest. The huge power in the follower's hand swept through the sky like a tide. The famous sword in the hand of the master of Samsara Palace was broken in the collision with deity. Now the short sword was tightly clamped by the follower and suddenly twisted. In the clear cracking sound, the power like a mighty tide suddenly surged and drowned the whole battlefield. All the sword energy was completely washed away. The huge power hit the slightly chubby body of the master of Samsara Palace. Blood sputtered from his body. His whole body was sent flying nearly 50 meters away by the follower's blow, and he fell hard on the ground. Blood flowed down the black cloak. Her body moved and stood up very slowly. She reached out her hand. There was no sword in her hand. But as she reached out, a sword chime suddenly sounded between heaven and earth. The surging sword intent began to gather in her hand. The follower looked at all this and narrowed his eyes. He took 2 steps forward and said blandly, "I know the master of Samsara Palace is not dead." He stared at the figure in front of him and continued, "But you are not the master of Samsara Palace. Who are you?" M. Chapter 458. Gong Sun Chi was silent for a long time. The night wind in Eastern Europe, whether it was winter or summer, carried a bone-chilling chill. The night wind whistled past the top of the mountain, carrying the warmth of the human body and blowing far away. Some memories seemed to emerge at the end of the wind, becoming clearer and clearer. The person has been sent away. Is this what you mean by you have no choice? If you don't move forward, you'll fall back. If you don't move forward, you'll fall back. We don't need forgiveness. Oh, bullshit. How dare you? Kneel down. What? Are you ashamed of yourself? Do you really want to make everyone's life meaningless? There are many meanings in life. There were many meanings that were meaningless in the first place. I'm standing here, and we're standing at a high place. What's the point? Ridiculous. It's the truth. I'm disappointed. Only the truth will disappoint people. It makes sense. Just like you're my father, this is the truth. The most disappointing truth. Not anymore. I'll announce to the public that you're dead. You're going to leave here, change your identity, change your name, and change your origin. Wait for the right time. Maybe when the time comes, you'll find that everything today is meaningful. What else do you want? I can try my best to satisfy you. I want to see my daughter. Just to see? I thought you were going to take her away. Take her away? These are all the documents that belong to you. We've arranged the task of your unit, the executors, the search and rescue personnel, the emergency doctor, and the certificate to confirm your death. There's also the plastic surgeon, the new identity, the place of origin, and all kinds of records from childhood to adulthood. The information is more real than the real one. There will be no flaws. From now on, when you walk out of this door, you're not my son. Whether it's disappointing or ridiculous, just wait for the future. Then who am I? Who should I be? The new identity and the new name will be Qi. Gongsun Qi suddenly came to his senses. The picture in his memory was warm and cold. The night sky in Eastern Europe was cold and warm. Qin Weibai was still standing in front of him, still bowing. Lin Fengting had already regained his composure. Gongsun Qi didn't know how long he had been silent. He took a deep breath and looked at Qin Weibai, who looked calm in front of him. He nodded and said, "It really is Boss Qin." "Third uncle, you flatter me." Qin Weibai smiled gently. "How did you know?" Gongsun Qi forced himself to calm down. He never thought that his identity would be exposed by Qin Weibai. There was no powerful and glorious Gongsun family in Zhongzhou State. Therefore, Gongsun Qi's surname was not Gongsun. He just raised his head. This matter was definitely a secret, not even his own brothers knew about it. Gongsun Qi couldn't figure out how Qin Weibai learned about this. Qin Weibai thought for a moment. There were some things that were difficult for her to explain, so she could only say casually, "I just got the information by accident." Gongsun Qi took a deep look at her and did not continue to dwell on this topic. He just calmly said, "Are you sure Jiang Qiansong will come here?" "This is his only choice." Qin Weibai said softly. Gongsun Qi nodded. "But I also want to remind you that from the standpoint of the Jiang family of South America, he can cooperate with anyone. But he will not cooperate with Zhongzhou State. I represent Zhongzhou State, and there are not many things that I can talk to him about. But as long as he comes, Zhongzhou State is his. The only choice." Qin Weibai's tone was more certain. The Samsara Palace expanded quickly, but its foundation was unstable. Moreover, the news of the death of the master of Samsara Palace had spread throughout the Dark World. The largest group of elites of the Samsara Palace in Eastern Europe had also been wiped out. The Lin clan was very strong, but it was unwilling to enter the secular world. So on this mountain tonight, there were 3 forces standing here, but only Gongsun Qi was qualified to talk to Jiang Qiansong. He might not represent Zhongzhou State, but the sound made by the Terracotta Army and the Snowdance Corps in Eastern Europe was the sound made by Zhongzhou State. As long as Jiang Qiansong escaped here tonight, facing Lin Fengting's sword, he could only choose to talk to Zhongzhou State. "You seem to attach great importance to the Jiang family of South America?" Lin Fengting suddenly asked. The hatred between the Jiang family of South America and the Samsara Palace was very deep. Especially since the final battle in Heaven Capital, the 2 superpowers had almost never coexisted peacefully in recent years. Jiang Qiansong's defense was very strong, but Lin Fengting would not believe that Qin Weibai, who only wanted to live, would rather give up the grudges between the 2 superpowers and rely on Jiang Qiansong's defense, or even waste such a cautious battle here. Qin Weibai hesitated. "I need the Jiang family of South America to provide me with something." "A list?" Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. How could they have it? It's a kind of liquid metal. Qin Weibai said slowly, at present, the Jiang family of South America's research and development of that metal should still be in the breakthrough stage. I have a formula in my hand that can speed up the research progress of that metal. If the situation is optimistic, as long as we get this metal, it will be a crucial trump card in the final battle. Lin Fengting frowned. Qin Weibai glanced at him and suddenly said, "Are you willing to face the devil troop of the Wang family of Beihai without any defensive equipment?" He had to fight against the devil troop without any defense. It wasn't that Lin Fengting couldn't bear it. But even if he could, he didn't want to. However, Lin Fengting still felt a little uncomfortable when he heard this. The Jiang family of South America was indeed unrivaled in the development technology of individual defensive equipment. But the Lin clan was not a good-for-nothing who couldn't produce similar equipment. As long as Lin Fengting wanted, the equipment he wore could be equally luxurious. The Lin clan also has its own technology, Lin Fengting said calmly. But it's never a bad thing to have better ones. Qin Weibai looked at the mountains under the night sky in the distance and said lightly, "And the Jiang family of South America has more than those technologies. Their resources are equally important. The situation has come to this point today, and I can't predict the outcome. It's never a bad thing to be more prepared. Our opponents are very strong, and our allies have ulterior motives. Under such circumstances, even a little bit of power is not enough for me. Not to mention Jiang Qiansong and the Jiang family of South America." "I don't understand." Gong Sun Chi came over. "You are Li Tianlan's woman, and everything you do is for him. But what good is it for Li Tianlan to lead the situation to this point today? Boss Qin, I have a question for you. Do you know why the Wang family of Beihai's killing intent against Li Tianlan is getting stronger and stronger?" 3 reasons. Qin Weibai glanced at him, and there was an inexplicable smile in her bright and dreamy eyes. First, Tianlan's identity is there. The Li family he carries is destined not to stand side by side with the Wang family of Beihai. Second, Tianlan's aptitude is there. If the Wang family of Beihai doesn't take action, Tianlan is destined to be a big problem for them in the future. This is indeed the reason. Gong Sun Chi nodded and looked at Qin Weibai. But this is not the most important thing. With Zhongzhou state mediating, some contradictions may not necessarily be life or death. The most important thing is naturally because of my existence. Qin Weibai chuckled and suddenly asked, "Are you afraid of me?" The question was abrupt and extremely arrogant. But Gong Sun Chi was not angry. He thought about it seriously and said cautiously, "I can't see through you." "Wang Tianzong can't see through me either." Qin Weibai by Pingjing said, "A woman he can't see through is with Tianlan. According to Wang Tianzong's character, he is bound to kill her as soon as possible, because he will not let go of anyone who may pose a hard threat to the future of the Wang family of Beihai. So, with all due respect, I personally think that Boss Qin has been between Li Tianlan and the Wang family of Beihai." Gong Sun Chi paused. "Picking a fight?" Qin Weibai smiled and said what Gong Sun Chi wanted to say but didn't say. Gong Sun Chi was silent and acquiesced. Qin Weibai's eyes gradually became cold. She slowly turned around, restrained her expression, and looked down the mountain. Her whole person seemed to gradually become an ice sculpture exuding a delicate fragrance but without any temperature. She was silent for a long time, and then whispered, "What do you know?" "At least I understand Li Tianlan's current situation. The Wang family of Beihai wanted to kill him. Kunlun City wanted to kill him. The country was not peaceful. Now, with the outbreak of chaos in Eastern Europe, the whole dark world was not peaceful. Li Tianlan was growing, but after tonight, he would occupy Eastern Europe, and the whole dark world would want his life. His situation will become unprecedentedly dangerous. Boss Qin, do you think Li Tianlan can be like a fish in water in such a cruel environment?" Gong Sun Chi asked. "I can't." Qin Weibai shook her head. Gong Sun Chi's eyes became extremely sharp in an instant. "Then why would you rather destroy the Samsara Palace to create the current chaos?" "Because of what you said." In such an environment, Tianlan can't be like a fish in water. It's even difficult for him to survive. Qin Weibai said softly, "This era is too cruel. That's why a new era is needed." "So what?" Gong Sun Chi sneered and said, "There are enemies everywhere. What's the difference between a new era and an old era?" "In the new era, Tianlan is the chosen one. Isn't this difference big enough?" Qin Weibai asked. "Geniuses are indeed very strong, but nothing is absolute in this world." Gong Sun Chi shook his head. Qin Weibai suddenly fell silent. Just when Gong Sun Chi thought she had nothing to say, she asked, "In your opinion, what is invincible?" Lin Fengting and Gong Sun Chi frowned at the same time. This was a big question. So neither of them answered. The invincible realm is invincible. The real invincible is perfect in terms of your martial arts. Perfection doesn't have any flaws. Only those who are perfect and without flaws are the chosen one. There are two sayings in the Dark World. Based on the martial arts of the Li family and the Wang family of Beihai, there will be reality and illusion in the end. Light and darkness. That is the so-called road of the chosen one. But many people actually forget that the person who pointed out these two roads has never seen the real chosen one himself. Gong Sun Chi and Lin Fengting looked at each other, and neither of them spoke. Only Qin Weibai's cold but sweet voice echoed in the mountain wind. How ridiculous it is for people who have never seen the chosen one to talk about the chosen one. Since it is already perfect without flaws, then what is the difference between reality and illusion, light and darkness in the end? The real chosen one is the strongest in all aspects, so the sword intent of reality and illusion can alternate day and night in the end. The sword of day and night can also break the sky and the sea in the end. In front of the chosen one, martial arts is martial arts. As for those who regard those two roads as the truth, they can only be close to the level of the chosen one. Qin Weibai turned to look at Lin Fengting and Gong Sun Chi and whispered, "Tianlan is the chosen one, but do you know what the chosen one is? Invincible in the world, absolute domination. In my opinion, the real chosen one is the one who can overturn the whole dark world alone. In the era of the chosen one, no one can kill the chosen one, no lineup, no method." Lin Fengting suddenly glanced at Qin Weibai, thinking that since no method could kill the chosen one, what about Dongqing Huangtu? Qin Weibai noticed Lin Fengting's gaze. She seemed to think of something and turned her head slightly. She whispered, "Unless he wants to die." Chapter 459. At 9 o'clock at night. The starry sky of Eastern Europe was getting lonelier. The cold moon dyed the night with a layer of pale white. On the quiet top of the mountain, Lin Fengting smoked and looked at the direction of the base of the Jiang family of South America against the wind. Gong Sun Chi stood on the other side with a frown, thinking about the new era that Qin Weibai mentioned and the position of Zhongzhou state in the so-called new era. Without flaming fire by her side, Qin Weibai carried a delicate backpack in her hand. She opened the backpack and took out a thermos flask. She took a sip of warm water and remained silent. Standpoint had always been a very complicated thing. Only with people would there be a standpoint, and with a standpoint, there would be politics, and with politics, there would be benefits. Benefits were placed in the most central position, and everyone around benefits had different directions. However, there was more than just profit in the world. And the future, the present, and the past. The world was like the shape of a pyramid. It was quiet, and the higher it was, the quieter it was. There were fewer places, and there were fewer people. The small number of people at the very top were enemies and entangled with each other. In the end, it all turned into grudges. The entanglement of gratitude and grudges had resulted in the current complicated and treacherous world. Lin Fengting thought about the future of the Lin clan and the past of the Wang family of Beihai. If the chaos in Eastern Europe was destined to be the starting point for the Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai to part ways, then Qin Weibai's participation was bound to bring great changes to the future of the Lin clan that could not be concealed. With Qin Weibai, the Lin clan was destined to get closer to the Li family and Li Tianlan than ever before. In Qin Weibai's new era, Li Tianlan and the Li family were the focus of dispute. How could the Lin clan hide from the world then? What about the friendship with the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years? These were all questions that Lin Fengting needed to consider. Gong Sun Qi's thoughts were equally complicated. If there was really a new era after the chaos in Eastern Europe, it would undoubtedly be beneficial to Li Tianlan, but the interests of Zhongzhou state would certainly be damaged to varying degrees. Gong Sun Qi was the leader of the Terracotta Army and a neutral force in Zhongzhou state. However, he could only remain neutral when his surname was Gong Sun. If he changed his surname, how could he remain neutral? Zhongzhou state was a country. It was once home. Now it was Li Tianlan. He was in the middle. Qin Weibai's third uncle connected everything together. Family, country, and individual. Gong Sun Qi stood in the center and also had to consider what to do. The mountain wind became more and more piercingly cold. As it blew past the mountain peak, a shrill whistling sound could be heard. Gong Sun Qi took a deep breath and glanced at Qin Weibai. The word, third uncle, came out of her mouth. What kind of glory was that? How heavy was that? Qin Weibai did not notice Gong Sun Qi's gaze. Lin Fengting was thinking about the friendship between the Lin clan and the Wang family of Beihai. Gong Sun Qi was thinking about his country. Qin Weibai just thought about Li Tianlan quietly. The wind blew her long hair and the scarf around her neck. Her natural and rich body fragrance filled the entire lightning city along with the wind. Qin Weibai's eyes were a little blurred, a little joyful, and a little happy. At this moment, all the dangers, conspiracies, deceptions, and bloodshed seemed to be far away from her. It had been the 13th day since he left Lin and for Eastern Europe. A day felt like a year. She really missed him. She wanted to be with him. She wanted to be with him. The mountain wind was chilly. The corners of her eyes and brows were filled with affection and gentleness as she held the thermos flask in her hand. So warm. The sound of a text message notification rang out. Qin Weibai took out her mobile phone and looked at it. The mobile phone wallpaper that she had used for 3 years was still the photo of her and Li Tianlan snuggling up in the dormitory of the Sky Academy. A simple text message blocked her face. His Highness Li Tianlan has arrived at the office of the president. The overall situation is settled. Qin Weibai looked at the text message in her hand quietly. The tenderness and lovesickness in her eyes gradually faded, becoming calm, clear, and indifferent. In an instant, her entire temperament underwent a drastic change. Gong Sun Qi and Lin Fengting turned around at the same time. Qin Weibai stood up. Tianlan has succeeded. Qin Weibai looked at Lin Fengting and Gong Sun Qi. Her voice was very soft, but an unimaginably strong aura suddenly diffused from her. Confident, calm, cold, and proud. High and mighty. Lin Fengting and Gong Sun Qi involuntarily shifted their eyes. The night was still dark, but Qin Weibai, standing in the night, seemed to suddenly become extremely dazzling. Lin Fengting laughed at himself. Maybe he didn't want to admit it. But in this world, some people, no matter where they came from, were indeed born to be high and overlook everything. For example, Qin Weibai. Similarly, some people were born to climb and struggle in the dark abyss. For example, Li Tianlan. She and he were close to each other. They were up and down, front and back. It was like heaven and earth were slowly merging. When they really faced each other, a new world would inevitably be born. And a new era. What's next? Lin Fengting asked. Next, it's our business. Qin Weibai said softly, those who are guilty should be tried. The voice of this sentence was also very soft. But when he heard this sentence, Gong Sun Qi clearly felt the coldness of the surrounding air, as if the whole surrounding mountain area had become extremely gloomy. In one day, 3 invincible realm experts died. Next, it was Qin Weibai's trial of the entire dark world. Isn't it a little too hasty? Lin Fengting and Gong Sun Qi asked at the same time. As soon as the words came out, the two of them finally looked at each other for the first time tonight. Why is it hasty? Qin Weibai glanced at the two of them. Gong Sun Qi was silent. But Lin Fengting, who knew Qin Weibai, suddenly felt an extremely heavy pressure. Perhaps except for himself, including the members of the major branches of the Lin clan, no one knew why he made Qin Weibai the acting patriarch of the Lin clan. It was not because he wanted to use the Lin clan to help Qin Weibai, at least not entirely. At least in Lin Fengting's heart, he made Qin Weibai the patriarch of the Lin clan because he wanted Qin Weibai to help the Lin clan. As for the reason? Because some people were born to be superior. I can't grasp Tianzong's state now. Lin Fengting told the truth. Lin Fengting still had no clear image information about what happened in front of the Rekvia castle. Some written information could not help him judge Wang Tianzong's current state. When martial arts reached the level of him and Wang Tianzong, a slight mistake in judgment might lead to a completely different ending. What's more, Wang Tianzong had broken through again. Lin Fengting was no longer his opponent. At this time, his judgment could not be wrong. He couldn't grasp Wang Tianzong's state now. He believed that Qin Weibai couldn't grasp it either. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough was an accident for each of them. It was the biggest accident. At least for now, it seems that no one in the dark world can grasp Wang Tianzong's state. Qin Weibai said quietly, since we can't grasp it, we might as well imagine him as the strongest. He is the strongest now. Lin Fengting raised his eyebrows. Qin Weibai nodded and said, yes, he is indeed the strongest in the dark world, but not in martial arts. Now Wang Tianzong was indeed invincible in the world. But above the half-step chosen one, there was indeed a real chosen one. Perhaps such a chosen one did not exist now. But the meaning of the word, chosen one, in martial arts did exist. Wang Tianzong was not the strongest in martial arts. But Qin Weibai was willing to imagine him as the strongest. It was not just to increase the pressure on them. Lin Fengting's eyes flickered, and his voice became dignified involuntarily. His voice was very slow, which seemed to make the night sky tremble slightly. Do you mean that Tianzong will take the last step in Eastern Europe? Qin Weibai was silent for a long time. Wang Tianzong was now a half-step chosen one. The last step was naturally the real chosen one. A chosen one who could overturn the entire dark world alone. Lin Fengting stared at Qin Weibai closely, waiting for her answer. After a long time, Qin Weibai nodded and said, he will. Lin Fengting's body shook, and he said in a hoarse voice, your speculation? It's more than speculation. Qin Weibai shook her head. Lin Fengting suddenly didn't know what to feel. Qin Weibai's answer was more than speculation. It was basically infinitely close to the truth. Wang Tianzong. Would he make a complete breakthrough in the chaos in Eastern Europe? He was in his 50s this year. It was already a miracle for him to break through from the peak of the invincible realm to a half-step chosen one. Would he break through again? Lin Fengting was in a trance. When he recalled Wang Tianzong's face again, he actually felt a little absent-minded. At this moment, he finally remembered when they were young. Summer Solstice, who was extremely talented and was considered by Senior Li, Senior Wang, and Senior Lin to be the chosen one. She was the first of the four to break through the invincible realm, and her talent was the first. But in the end, she destroyed her foundation as the chosen one for the Wang family of Beihai. Li Guangtu, who was extremely paranoid and never retreated, also had the potential to reach the peak of swordsmanship. But in the end, he lost his blood in a case of treason. He was lazy and ignorant. He followed his heart and cultivated his mind all the way to the peak of the invincible realm. What about Wang Tianzong? Lin Fengting suddenly found that at this moment, he couldn't remember what Wang Tianzong looked like when he was young. Among the four of them, Wang Tianzong was the eldest. But at that time, Wang Tianzong didn't have the so-called king's temperament, and his talent was not the most outstanding. Among the four of them, he broke through the invincible realm the latest. He was the eldest just because he was the oldest. In Lin Fengting's impression, Wang Tianzong seemed to have always been silent. In the past, when they gathered together, he always quietly watched them play, quietly cultivate, quietly fall in love, and quietly break through. Everything was silent. It wasn't that he could keep a low profile. It was that among the four of them, Wang Tianzong seemed to be the least noticeable one. Summer Solstice, Li Guangtu, Lin Fengting, and Wang Tianzong. These were the 4 people in the past. The 4 people standing together were enough to sweep the world. Now looking back, the most talented one destroyed his foundation, the most serious and paranoid one became a sinner, the idle and casual one was still idle and casual, but Wang Tianzong, who had been silent, became the sword emperor of Zhongzhou state and the first on the divine list. Now, he even began to take steps toward the chosen one. The past years were like a long river, constantly recalling in Lin Fengting's ears, setting off huge waves. Lin Fengting didn't feel jealous. He had gradually forgotten what Wang Tianzong looked like when he was young. But in retrospect, everything about Wang Tianzong now seemed to be what he deserved. The chosen one, Lin Fengting murmured to himself. How elegant was the chosen one who overturned the entire dark world. Lin Fengting knew that he was invincible. But this chosen one, who should have been invincible, was not really invincible now. At least in the Samsara Palace, there was a sword stroke of the chosen one in his peak state. Was it the extremely sharp and unparalleled reality and illusion? Or was it the light and darkness that alternated between day and night? It turns out that in the end, this game in Eastern Europe is the battlefield between the Samsara Palace and the Wang family of Beihai. Lin Fengting smiled in a complicated tone. The battlefield is everyone's battlefield. Qin Weibai whispered, no matter how strong Wang Tianzong is, he has to face the sword stroke of the Samsara Palace. And in such a huge battlefield, everyone will have their own position. Naturally, you also have your position. So I didn't ask you to go to Reki City. If possible, I don't even want you to take action until the final battle. Lin Fengting narrowed his eyes. Vaguely, he seemed to understand what Qin Weibai meant. You want me to build up strength for myself? In the chaotic general trend, he didn't take action. There was no doubt that he wanted to keep himself in the peak state and build up strength for the peak sword stroke. But the chosen one was the chosen one. No matter how strong he was only at the peak of the invincible realm. You can understand it that way. Qin Weibai said, strictly speaking, before the final battle, I want to ask you to hide a sword stroke. Chapter 460. The night was still dark, but the atmosphere on the top of the mountain was getting more and more solemn. The chosen one. This was a word that could suppress the entire dark world and make it hard for them to breathe. When this word was combined with the Wang family of Beihai with a long history, it was a complete nightmare, enough to make everyone tremble from the soul. Lin Fengting glanced at Qin Weibai again. Qin Weibai stood there quietly, her eyes calm, but a very affirmative light was overflowing from her eyes, making her look very determined. Lin Fengting nodded silently. He stood beside Qin Weibai now, so he would believe her. Qin Weibai said that Wang Tianzong would break through. Then he would definitely break through. Therefore, the Wang family of Beihai with the chosen one would be very terrible. And the chosen one with the support of the Wang family of Beihai would be even more terrible. It's incredible. Lin Fengting sighed softly, looked at Qin Weibai, and suddenly said with a chuckle, you don't seem to be worried? I don't accept it. Qin Weibai said softly. Lin Fengting was slightly stunned, and then he understood what Qin Weibai meant. Qin Weibai was not worried. She only refused to accept it. It's useless to worry. I can't stop Wang Tianzong. If I deal with him now, other aspects will be out of control. Wang Tianzong is very strong, but he is not the overall situation. In the overall situation, everyone is the overall situation. The only thing I can do is to drag Wang Tianzong to the end. Before that, I need to clean up some other variables first. So I want to ask you to hide a sword. Qin Weibai further explained. What about me? Gong Sunqi suddenly asked. Boss Qin, you called me here tonight, not just to let me talk with Jiang Qiansong, right? Of course. Qin Weibai nodded. But I don't need you to do anything here. If possible, I hope that the Terracotta Army can support Tianlan at some critical moments in the next few days. Gong Sunqi narrowed his eyes and looked at Qin Weibai. Qin Weibai looked at him calmly. The Terracotta Army must be neutral. Gong Sunqi said expressionlessly, this is the principle. The terracotta army is indeed a neutral force. But third uncle is not. Qin Weibai emphasized this extremely secretive title. Gong Sun Chi was about to speak, but he suddenly thought of something and looked at Qin Weibai thoughtfully. He smiled and his eyes were playful. I'm your third uncle? Qin Weibai's face was cold. She said calmly, aren't you? I have a question. Gong Sun Chi said, if you can give me an answer, I can agree to your request. Qin Weibai said. Gong Sun Chi was silent for a while. Then he said in a hoarse voice, it is said that the intelligence system of the Samsara Palace is unparalleled in the world. Does the Samsara Palace know who cut off my path to the invincible realm? Gong Sun Chi was the strongest expert of the invincible realm in the dark world. He was also the strongest superior of the half-step invincible realm. In his current state, he couldn't be regarded as not having broken through to the invincible realm, nor could he be regarded as a complete invincible realm expert. In some ways, he should be regarded as an invincible realm expert whose foundation had been damaged. In this state, Gong Sun Chi was extremely terrifying. Even the real invincible realm experts at the bottom of the holy list were no match for him. But his biggest weakness was that his foundation had been damaged. His strength was still there, but his physical strength and explosive power were always a little weaker than those of the real invincible realm experts. He was plotted against at the critical moment of his breakthrough. That kind of vicious attack completely destroyed all his hopes, making it impossible for him to enter the invincible realm in this life. This was a blood feud for Gong Sun Chi. The whole Zhongzhou state was also furious. It was just that some things had been investigated for many years, but there was no clue. But the Samsara Palace was different. Their intelligence ability had almost been recognized by the whole dark world. Qin Weibai could even find out his identity. Gong Sun Chi believed that as long as the Samsara Palace investigated this matter, they would definitely find some clues. I investigated this matter. Qin Weibai suddenly said, whether you believe it or not, the Samsara Palace also spent a lot of resources to investigate this matter, but Gong Sun Chi raised his eyebrows, but his heart sank. I'm not sure. Qin Weibai suddenly said, her voice suddenly paused. Not only her voice, but Qin Weibai's whole body stiffened for a moment. She seemed to think of something, and her eyes fluctuated violently for a moment. Then she slowly shook her head as if she felt that it was impossible. Countless pieces of information were constantly gathered in her mind, sorted out, analyzed, filtered and gathered again. In an instant, Qin Weibai's mind seemed to be stirred up by a storm. She frowned slightly, and her whole person looked with a kind of almost frozen indifference and seriousness. She suddenly glanced at Gong Sun Chi and did not speak. Do you have any clues? Gong Sun Chi suddenly took a step forward and asked excitedly. I'm not sure. Qin Weibai shook her head slowly and repeated her answer again. What on earth do you think of? Gong Sun Chi looked at Qin Weibai seriously. I'm just wondering if a certain rat has been hiding in the dark has something to do with your matter. Qin Weibai said calmly, Uncle, how can this matter be so easy to investigate? I can only give you a direction at most. If you really want to find the mastermind, you have to pay more attention to this person, but you can't touch him. Gong Sun Chi raised his eyebrows and said in a deep voice. Your colleague. Qin Weibai was calm and composed. Colleague. Gong Sun Chi murmured to himself, and then asked in a tone that even he didn't believe. It's another one. Qin Weibai said. Gong Sun Chi had 3 colleagues. One was General Yi of 9th Heaven, code-named Vermilion Bird. One was General Shang of 9 Serenities, code-named White Tiger. One was Lieutenant General Li Wangxing of 9 Regions, code-named Black Tortoise. However, Black Tortoise had just joined the Terracotta Army in recent years. He was more like a junior than a colleague in front of the 3 seniors. Qin Weibai was not talking about Yi, but another one. Shang? Gong Sun Chi asked, and his voice suddenly became much heavier. Qin Weibai was silent. Gong Sun Chi didn't say anything for a long time. After a long time, he took a deep look at Qin Weibai and said, Thank you. I hope you won't forget what you promised me, uncle. Qin Weibai's tone was quiet and soft, like a real junior. I will try my best, but I can't guarantee anything. The chosen one battlefield, Gong Sun Chi laughed at himself. In the chaos of Eastern Europe, Lin Fengting needed to hide a sword. Even if his sword couldn't reverse everything, it was bound to be one of the most important swords in the entire chaos. But Gong Sun Chi himself, if he could break through smoothly in the past, he should be qualified to hide a sword now. But now, with the reputation of being the strongest expert in the half-step invincible realm, in the chosen one battlefield, he didn't even have the qualification to guarantee anything, let alone hide a sword. In fact, you two don't have to worry too much. Qin Weibai said, Wang Tianzong's breakthrough is destined, but he doesn't have enough luck. Even if he breaks through, there is nothing to be afraid of. Not enough luck? Gong Sun Chi asked in an interrogative tone. Lin Fengting also felt that this sentence was a little ridiculous. Wang Tianzong controlled the Wang family of Beihai. If his luck was not enough, didn't it mean that the Wang family of Beihai's luck was not enough? In the hundreds of years of the Dark World, the Wang family of Beihai's luck was like a dragon, and its momentum was like the sun at noon. Who dared to say that the Wang family of Beihai's luck was not enough? I remember Master Xianxia said that in the past 500 years, the luck of the Wang family of Beihai was the most prosperous at this time. Gong Sun Chi said slowly. If it weren't for this, Tianzong probably wouldn't have been able to take that step. Lin Fengting agreed with this statement, but Qin Weibai disagreed. Xianxia? She chuckled. The smile was not contemptuous, but it was indescribably arrogant, with a kind of naked disdain. You don't believe in metaphysics or fate? Gong Sun Chi asked. I do. Qin Weibai said softly. There was a faint but genuine reverence in her voice. Perhaps in the dark world, only Flaming Fire, who was closest to her, knew that Qin Weibai, who was raised by a monk, was a very devout believer of the new stream and also believed in God. She had faith. She just didn't believe in people. I believe that fate and metaphysics have their reasons, but can the so-called metaphysics grandmasters really be trusted? Qin Weibai asked. Gong Sun Chi frowned. Many of the things the master said have actually been proved. Qin Weibai said, then I'll say a few things. In 10 years at most, uncle, you will die in Zhongzhou state and become a stepping stone for Tianlan to break through to the invincible realm. In 10 years at most, uncle, you will die in Beihai and become a stepping stone for Wang Shengxiao to break through to the invincible realm. In 10 years at most, uncle, you will die in Kunlun and become a stepping stone for Gu Hanshan to break through to the invincible realm. Gong Sun Chi was speechless. If it weren't for Qin Weibai, a beautiful woman, in front of him, he really wanted to scold her. What is this? He asked in a deep voice. This is metaphysics, and it can also be said to be prophecy. Qin Weibai said blandly, even if it's not in the intelligence of Zhongzhou state, don't you have channels to know it? I'm the adopted daughter of Great Master Wei. His cultivation is higher than Xianxuanzi's, right? What I said before are all prophecies. I can give you whichever result you want. The 3 prophecies were all about falling and death. The locations were Beihai and Kunlun in Zhongzhou state. Gong Sun Chi suddenly felt that he was choosing a cemetery for himself. Zhongzhou state was too big and the location was uncertain. Kunlun was too cold, and it was a world of ice and snow. It was boring. The scenery of Beihai was good, and the landscape was picturesque. But what the hell does it have to do with me? Gong Sun Chi glanced at Qin Weibai, coughed dryly, and asked hesitantly, well, can I live? He believed it. Lin Fengting held back his laughter and turned his head. He didn't want to see the low IQ of the dignified azure dragon of Zhongzhou state. There was also a smile in Qin Weibai's eyes. I don't believe you. Gong Sun Chi said in a deep voice, I believe in Great Master Wei. Don't you understand? Qin Weibai said softly, metaphysics and fate do have their own truth. A real metaphysics grandmaster can indeed see some things, even predict some things, resolve some tribulations in fate, and change one's destiny. But what kind of cultivation do you think can predict a person's future completely and accurately? She even knew when he would achieve something in the future? Is such a person still a metaphysics grandmaster? Such an ability is comparable to that of ghosts and gods. The Lin clan also has its own metaphysics grandmaster. For many years, he has predicted the future of the Lin clan and condensed fate. Mr. Lin, when did the metaphysics grandmaster of the Lin clan accurately predict something for someone in the Lin clan and realize it? Lin Fengting coughed awkwardly. A few times, but those are special circumstances. He suddenly froze, as if he understood something. Qin Weibai also laughed. Special circumstances. These 4 words are the key to all the accurate predictions of the metaphysics grandmaster. What do you want to say? Gong Sun Chi took a deep breath and said slowly. What she wants to say is that metaphysics is magical, but 2 accurate predictions often represent a certain position. Lin Fengting thought of the past predictions of Lin Su of the Lin clan and sighed. Gong Sun Chi still didn't understand. Qin Weibai simply made it clearer. Uncle, do you know what Great Master Wu's greatest achievement was? Great Master Wu had instructed many people in his life, and they were all extremely accurate. But his greatest achievement, Sai City. Gong Sun Chi said. Many years ago, it was Great Master Wu who persuaded Situ Cangyue to go to Mount Taibai in Zhongzhou State. So Situ Cangyue got rid of the influence of the Li family's treason case and finally established Sai City. But in fact, Great Master Wu could only be sure that there were opportunities in the north, but he couldn't be sure what the north meant to Situ Cangyue. Qin Weibai said, I'm sure that you will die, because people will die, but I'm not sure how you will die in the end. So it needs external forces. Today, I prophesied that you would die in the North Sea. I can't do that, but I need to borrow the help of external forces to push some things forward and finally make you die in the North Sea. This way, my prophecy will be a success. Metaphysics grandmasters do exist. However, a superpower that can push everything together with a metaphysics grandmaster is a metaphysics grandmaster that can accurately predict the future. Don't you understand? My foster father is respected as a god because the Li family helped him push a lot of things behind the scenes, which eventually led to some results. Xianxia is called a grandmaster, and there are also forces behind him pushing some results. That's the true face of metaphysics. He said that the Wang family of Beihai has the most luck now, so there will be a lot of tricks behind it. I'm not interested in knowing these. The only thing I know is that Wang Tianzong has enough luck now. Even if the Wang family of Beihai has the most luck, that luck may not belong to Wang Tianzong. Lin Fengting was about to speak when he suddenly looked up at the night sky in the distance. The night sky was silent. Qin Weibai turned her head and looked back. In just a few seconds, Gong Sun Chi had been keenly aware of the changes in the wind around him. All the wind came from the front, and the space was shaking slightly. It seemed that something was moving fast in the night. Lin Fengting took a step forward calmly. A sword intent emanated from his body and kept circling with the wind. Vaguely, a figure seemed to appear in the distance in the sight of the 3. The figure was extremely fast and rushed over without stopping. A light flashed in Qin Weibai's eyes. At this moment, she could see Jiang Qiansong. But standing in Lin Fengting's sword intent, even if Jiang Qiansong was an expert on the divine list, he could not see them in a panic. Jiang Qiansong's figure appeared at the foot of the mountain. He rushed forward. He went straight to the mountainside. Finally, he rushed to the top of the mountain. There was nothing in his sight, so he walked into Lin Fengting's sword intent in a daze. A piercingly cold wind suddenly howled and blew. Under the night sky, a thick tornado with a height of hundreds of meters suddenly appeared on the top of the mountain. Jiang Qiansong's figure suddenly froze in place. Lin Fengting, Gong Sun Chi, and Qin Weibai stood around him. The majestic sword energy kept whistling around the 4 of them. Mr. Jiang? Lin Fengting laughed. What a coincidence! Jiang Qiansong's face was pale, and his heart sank to the bottom in an instant, as if falling into the abyss. At this moment he remembered what his follower had said, but it was too late to regret it. I'm afraid it's not a coincidence, is it? Jiang Qiansong took a deep breath and sneered. Indeed not. Qin Weibai said, "We're waiting for you here." Waiting for me? Jiang Qianzong's tone became colder. What are you waiting for? Are you going to invite me to tea? I'm here to give you two choices. Qin Weibai looked at Jiang Qianzong and said calmly, "Do you choose to surrender or die?" You're tuning in to the Wandering Hero YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.